listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across these disunited states we call America, it's time now for another edition this week. Well, one of the last this week of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, and events from across this country and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the Independent Corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. It's August 26th. It's a Thursday morning. It's just past 7 a.m. Eastern. And in my opinion, walking over it was beautiful. I hope it's the same for you. Let's get into headlines. I want to give people a quick disclaimer first. We're going to be off all of next week. Again, I've been warning folks throughout the week. Jamarl and I are both off. No Fault Lines radio this next week. Then the week after that, Jamarl comes back. I'm still off. I know. And then we both come back 2 weeks later. It's going to be a good little trip, though. But heading out to the Pacific Northwest. Anyway, we can come back to that at some other point. Let's get into the headlines. First up, in COVID news, about 170,000 new COVID cases reported yesterday in the United States. There were also 1,470 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 152,000 cases per day. That's an increase of 23% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 52% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated. 61% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 38,364,779 people across the United States and killed 632,522 people. Florida is the only state in the U.S. where more people are dying of COVID now than at any other point in the pandemic. Last summer, they had their previous record of 185 deaths per day. But a few days ago, Florida's rate increased to 200 a day consistently and even hit 228. As part of her first full day in office, New York Governor Kathy Hochul revealed 12,000 more New Yorkers that have died from COVID than was previously reported. This decree further divides the new governor from her predecessor and asks who is lying to play into their agenda more. Well, it's something to come back on, but a big first step. I'll put it like that. Big first step, and it's not helping Cuomo. But again, we'll come back to that. Mississippi has now quarantined about 15% of all K-12 public school students this month, either for positive COVID-19 cases or for known exposures to people with COVID-19. The 65,525 students who have been ordered to isolate include 11,766 who have tested positive, which is more than 1 in 6, which is, a decently large number, actually, of students that test positive. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has said she will stick with the strategy of a nationwide lockdown in order to fight a rising number of cases. This has become increasingly unpopular as the number of cases in a recent outbreak continue to rise. Ardern said that health experts had advised her to continue with the elimination approach. Vietnam is sending 2,000 soldiers to a manufacturing hub to help contain an outbreak there, which health officials say they could see another 50,000 cases in the next 2 weeks. The province is the site of plants for many foreign manufacturers. I'm sure that figures into their thought process. And Texas Governor Greg Abbott has issued another executive order doubling down on his ban of vaccine mandates. The governor tested positive last week despite being fully vaccinated. In national news, here back in the States, the first person in the kidnapping plot against Governor Gretchen Whitmer has been given 6 years in prison for his role in the crime. Ty Garbin was the only one of the group to admit guilt, while his accomplices still tried to win their case under entrapment. Garbin testified to many of the group's training practices, including a shoot house, quote unquote, with a similar layout as Governor Whitmer's house, which they frequently raided to practice. Inmates in a Northwest Arkansas jail have been prescribed ivermectin to treat their coronavirus cases. The drug is an aggressive anti-parasitic medication that has only been given approval as a head lice and parasitic worm treatment medicine. Federal health officials even warned the state that ivermectin should not be used to treat COVID, as it can cause serious harm. We'll see what comes of this. In other words, if they, what repercussions they are for using it. And also, frankly, if it works, which there's still a possibility it does.
I mean, the evidence that's been out there has shown it not to do anything.
No, that's not true. It is true.
Look it up. The most recent evidence where, one of the studies that people were harping on couldn't even be printed again because the study had all of this bogus data in it.
I know, but I can say the same thing about. My point is, the jury's still out.
Show me the study.
Well, we've talked about it before, but we can come back to it maybe because I don't want to put too much of a Yeah, a thing in headlines. Let's get through it. In international news, large numbers of people waiting to escape Taliban rule remain outside of the Kabul airport, despite threats of an impending terror attack by ISIS. Britain's armed minister said the threat was quote-unquote severe. Sadly, it is also the case that evacuation flights may not be able to get everyone out in time. Pakistan's open border crossings are also seeing large crowds of people attempting to seek refuge in the neighboring state. Tigrayan authorities say an Ethiopian government blockade has left 1 million people on the brink of starvation. Abiy Ahmed's government has blamed the Tigrayan rebels for the problem. Tigrayan officials, however, say the local health system has been crippled by the Ethiopian government, a situation causing health problems there and problems with COVID-19 too, of course. And in business news, flamin' hot Mountain Dew. I'm going to skip right. I know I skipped the lead up to it, but let's just get right into it. Flamin' Hot Cheetos, you got Mountain Dew, and apparently you combine them. Flamin' Hot Mountain Dew has been announced and is going to be launching on the company's website this next week, which is absolutely insane and ridiculous, and frankly, nobody should have. I don't know how else to say it. But those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So I'm guessing you want to come back to ivermectin instead of talking Flamin' Hot Mountain Dew.
Flaming Hot Mountain Dew. I don't know what that is. I mean, what, it's just hot Mountain Dew?
I'm guessing it's probably like they've got a little bit of cayenne there, maybe even a touch of cumin, a lot of cayenne. I don't know. Yeah, a bunch of capsaicin.
Do people drink that like that?
Well, it hasn't come out yet, but I'm sure they will.
It just doesn't seem like a pleasant drink.
There's a market for everybody, but there are there are businesses who routinely will release unpleasant drinks just because it's buzzworthy, and people like us will talk about it occasionally.
Like fish pizza or something like that. It's like, ugh.
Exactly. Like sriracha barbecue chips. Well, those are delicious.
Wait, to each their own, right? Exactly. I mean, they take the business risk, they reap the reward, or otherwise.
It's true.
I would imagine Code Red, Baja Blast. I mean, some of them have worked quite well.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can go back to ivermectin. The analysis that has been coming out from all of these institutions have not shown any efficacy for ivermectin. And I get that people have been eating horse pills and goat pills and been buying those things in bulk, and they've been using that. But this is becoming a hydrochloroquine thing again, where you have all of these people who just believe in it because they believe in it. The data isn't there. Right here, our meta-analysis of survival for ivermectin had to be retracted after one of the main studies was suspected of medical fraud. With the revised version, there's no statistical significant survival benefit for ivermectin, so the original version should not be quoted. And this is because people were quoting basically a bogus study over and over and over again. As people kept pointing out, dude, they're saying don't take this stuff because they're not showing a medicinal benefit for it. And it was like, no, man, look at the study. And it was the same thing over and over and over again. So it got to the point where it hit this crescendo where, people started pointing out, like, dude, there's no there to this. At the very least, not a there that we've seen in any kind of medically statistical way. But that's not going to matter. People are still going to take it. The FDA is still going to be pleading with people not to, and they're going to continue to buy out the horse pills.
So on the one hand, I agree. On the other hand, I disagree. And let me get into it. I've done my own meta-analysis as a non-scientist and have found recently compelling evidence and also studies that say that there's no effect. And frankly, it's not like there's a large study that is either bunked or debunked this yet. So therefore, people who are like, ivermectin works, and they're parading it as if it's a proven thing, they're wrong. But in my opinion, also people who are saying ivermectin clearly doesn't work are also, the jury's still out. Science is still out there. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people are going to course doses of ivermectin.
Right,
a lot of people,
doctors don't prescribe it because it doesn't work.
Because doctors don't prescribe it because we don't know that it works.
Because it doesn't work.
We don't know that.
It doesn't work.
We don't know that.
Well, show me something to indicate it.
That's ascientific. I'm not saying that it does work. I'm not saying that it does work. You're saying that it doesn't work.
The ascientific part is basically saying because of some kind of belief that something does it. I am not cultish about this stuff.
No, but you're responding to people's beliefs. But notice, I don't actually have a positive belief. I'm saying I don't know. So it's like your response to me is missing the thing. I get you're trying to counter people who are irrationally doing it.
What studies have you been seeing that have shown ivermectin to be effective? Because that's all I care about.
The main one that I rely on is a 240-person study out of Argentina that split two groups of nurses, one into a control, one into a consistent dose of ivermectin as a prophylactic. Right. The nurses who got the prophylactic dose fared far better, and the control group fared far worse.
Okay.
So that's like a decent number of people in a non-clinical setting. And I get that. Yeah. But my point is, we haven't performed large-scale tests with appropriate doses on a prophylactic regime, as far as I can tell. There isn't a big push for that.
Right.
And maybe there should be, maybe there shouldn't. I get that health authorities, medical authorities, don't want people to jump the gun and overinvest in something, and neither do I. But notice that's not what I'm arguing for.
It's not even jumping the gun. There's no there that they're aware of to indicate it. That's the catch.
Exactly, which is not grounds to say it doesn't work. It's grounds to say
is grounds
it's grounds to say we don't know that it works, and therefore people should be cautious, and we should do more research.
I have zero issue with people with studies and everything else that push something in a particular way of saying, hey, this is showing some kind of medicinal benefit. I am not on board for the cultist stuff where people are
Neither am I.
Well, I mean, look.
That's what I've said consistently. Play this back. Listen to it some other time.
You gave one study. And I am perfectly okay with dealing with either the CDC and some of the other studies. Again, they've been pretty clear that this is not showing a benefit.
I get it.
But, I mean, you got your study, so fair enough.
I get it. That's what I'm saying. And we need to be more, I'll put it like this. If there were more research, one of us in fairly short order would be proven wrong. And that would be a good thing because then we would know. And right now, as far as I can tell, the research is slow. Conversation about it is being suppressed. People who are tentatively pushing for the idea that it might work, some of them are being called like horse drug crazies, and maybe they are. And other people are probably pretty reasonable. And I don't know, it doesn't matter in some sense which is the majority, but the point is, why are we doing this? Why are we castigating an entire group of people, many of whom probably are just curious about something because, frankly, they're suspicious of a vaccine, like you were earlier this year, and they're like looking for other treatments, and they're not bought into it. A lot of people probably aren't bought into it. Why aren't we talking to those people? Why are we doing research to inform those people?
Well, two things. I don't buy that information is being suppressed on ivermectin any more than I buy the cult that was saying it was being suppressed by hydrochloroquine.
What do you mean? It was being blocked from Facebook very consistently all last year.
Because there was no there to it.
That's literally information being suppressed. And how do you know there's no there?
Wait, what was being blocked? Ivermectin?
Yes, references to ivermectin very consistently. When people would talk about it on YouTube and on Facebook when they would share stories.
Were they blocking it because they were saying that it has a medicinal benefit? Is that why?
Very often it was just a trigger.
I don't buy that.
You know how this works. Algorithms, dude.
I don't buy that.
You buy it. Come on.
So you're telling me that as soon as you put ivermectin on your post, they just stop your post? You just put in the word ivermectin and they stop it.
I'm not saying in every damn case. I'm not saying if
I am making the point that it's probably contextual.
Dude, you're being hyperbolic.
I'm not being hyperbolic.
Okay, whatever. You're having an argument, Jamarl.
Okay, go ahead, Shine. Do what you got to do. I've been very clear. You're trying to overtalk and don't want to, let me get my point in. But fair enough.
Jamarl.
I've been very clear that my point is I don't buy it. This feels like a cult, just like it was for hydrochloroquine. And in the same way the hydrochloroquine was shown that it didn't work, this will likely be the same.
How much do you want to bet that if we go back and listen to who talked more, you would be quite a bit ahead? I would bet money. Do you want to bet money? Or are you just going to throw crap out to...
Throw crap out about what? You're basically saying I'm being hyperbolic.
You're saying that I'm dominating the conversation.
You're saying I'm being hyperbolic.
Yes. Okay. All right. Any other stories? We could talk about Kathy Hochul. Big news there because 12,000 new deaths confirmed on Cuomo's hands. Of course, Cuomo, former governor, just left a couple of days ago. Kathy Hochul, incoming governor, revealing he has more blood on his hands than even we thought. Now, will this see a resurrection of the nursing home story?
I mean, at this point, he's out. I mean, look, I told you, I think they should have impeached him. This notion of, okay, we'll let him leave in 14 days. I thought that was insane. To have that many people that he took policy that eventually got people killed. Full stop, right?
Yeah.
And then you add to that, the number of deaths were lowered. And then you find out that it was 12,000 more than the, 12,000 that he was hiding before. That's just, that's insane. The consequences of that, there should be consequences. I mean, basically, the new governor had to come into the office and say, by the way, there were more than 10,000 more people that are dead that Cuomo was hiding.
Yes.
I mean, should there be consequences for that? I mean, that just seems... Especially if you go to the reason why it was being done. Was this being done for his own benefit? Was this being done for a book deal? Was this being done for some kind of publicity? Was it purely being done to hide? Does the motivation matter in regards to the consequence? And I don't know. But
I don't know either.
That's a horrible story. 12,000.
One other side of this, when we talk about Cuomo, we were talking about this months ago, and it might be useful to remind ourselves. Cuomo and Gavin Newsom were the two big Democratic governors mid-last year who were being trumpeted as the correct response to COVID-19.
One of them on, both of them.
Both of them on tenor. Cuomo is literally out, and Gavin Newsom's looking like he's not going to win this recall vote.
Yeah, this looks bad for him. I was looking into, Kim Iverson was on Baxter, I think it was on Tuesday, and she was going into the issues associated with California and why it's this kind of weird thing where they're perfectly willing to get rid of these guys. And Newsom. I think it was like 60-something% of Republicans are like jazzed up to get rid of him. And then Democrats are barely, kind of there to keep him. And her thing was Gavin Newsom kept the lockdowns going pretty much all the way through, even when other people basically opened up their economies. And she was like, even then, you still had these kind of spikes in the issue. Then there was this thing of taxes, regressive gas tax, the shanty towns in regards to the homeless shelters. There's nowhere to get housing. Like she was like basically laying out a list of problems associated with California and why there's not this strong push to keep Newsom.
Yeah.
She was like, there's a lot of people, she says, that vote typically Democrat that don't really care about what happened to Newsom. And, that's not a good place to be in if you are the governor of California in the middle of a recall.
It's true.
Yeah.
And they're both on that line. And I guess it's just worth pointing out how easily some things can change. My point is there was a big cultural furor over the idea that Trump was horribly bungling this thing and that these guys were the Democratic solution to it that failed. I'm not saying that Trump is, his response was good. I'm saying their response was terrible.
Yeah.
And the contrast, it's like, it's worth reminding ourselves that contrast was made and it was completely wrong.
Yeah, it was bogus.
Totally bogus.
I mean, especially when you're looking at 12,000 more dead than over the 12,000 and more that was being hit in the first, no, I think it was 14,000 the first time around. But yeah, I mean, keep in mind, Cuomo was giving these, it's like evening briefings every day, talking about what we're doing in New York, the adults in the room, Trump's a clown, but I'm doing great. And then you find out, like it's several years later, like, a year later, oh, actually, all of those things were basically lying.
Yeah.
Like each and every one of those things. I mean, how many of those things did he do? And it's like, that means that he was basically gaming the information every time he would go out there and talk about how well he was doing in New York.
Yeah. And some of the stuff you just dredged up, it comes back to mind. Of course, he won the Emmy for it. Emmy recently taken away. But also, remember when he was talking about, I sleep well at night.
Yes.
Knowing that I've managed this crisis, knowing that I've managed this well. I sleep well at night. I put my head down on the pillow and I fall right to sleep. I'm extending it out.
Yeah.
He just said basically, I sleep well at night. But ridiculous, That's obscene, disgusting, and
he
hateful.
does sleep well. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying he probably does sleep well at night.
Yeah.
I get the feeling that Cuomo doesn't necessarily take responsibility for it.
Yeah. Well, let's go into our break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming back into our monologue segment, Jamarl's soapbox, and a short back and forth. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So there is an interesting tweet that I saw this morning. This has nothing to do with Afghanistan. This has nothing to do with COVID. It has nothing to do with anything, even on some level, terrestrial, even though in some way it does. NASA, National Aeronautics Space Administration Administrator Bill Nelson just invited China to join the United States in space exploration after saying the two countries are unfortunately in a space race. Cooperation on civic or civil space requires transparency, he noted, and China is very secretive. Now, this is Breaking Defense. This is one of the magazines that I like to read for either military or this, sci-fi and whatnot, or some of the scientific weapons and whatnot. But I was enamored by this. The idea that China is secretive, okay, fair enough. But let's be very clear. I was talking last week or a couple of weeks ago about a space-based weapon that we were going to release, that they were talking about releasing even back in 2020. Now, this is basically a special access project in the black, entirely in the black, that during Trump's release of Space Force, they were going to use that as one of their preeminent things, like, hey, look at what we've been developing and look what this weapon can do. And again, it wasn't just going to be disclosure. They were also going to actually show a test. I just read it. This is Breaking Defense. For months, top officials at the Department of Defense have been working towards declassifying the existence of a secret space weapon program, providing a real-world demonstration for its capabilities. The effort, which is being championed by General John Hyatt, the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is close enough to completion that there is a belief that the anti-satellite technology might have been revealed at this year's National Space Symposium. However, because of Afghanistan, because of COVID, this is basically put this on hold. Now, pulling the trigger on declassifying apparently requires the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines. It requires a thumbs up from Joe Biden. And the question on this is why? Why would they reveal a space-based weapon right now? And keep in mind, every other country around the world wants these things to be basically banned and wants treaties signed on these. And there were treaties signed on space-based weaponry. But all things being equal, that is pretty much going to be ignored. In this situation, we're basically, this country is pushing an arms race in space. And that is exactly what it's going to end up being, because how could it be anything else? You can't necessarily have a game-changing weapon that can either take out satellites, take out planes, or take out both, while simultaneously leaving the other countries to their own devices. What would it mean for, let's say, Russia or for China, for the United States to have a weapon that is just flying over people's heads in perpetuity that could either drop a nuke, a missile, some kind of kinetic weapon, or some kind of laser anywhere around the world? Is that okay? And will the other countries just kind of sit back and not do anything about that? Or will those other countries have to find some kind of balancing for that particular device? Now, they don't even know, or they haven't necessarily even released what the weapon is, only that it's some kind of space-based weapon. Speculation on what it could be or what the demonstration would be ranges from terrestrial-based mobile lasers for blinding adversary reconnaissance to onboard proximity-triggered radio frequency jammers on certain military satellites to high-powered microwave systems that can zap electronics carried on maneuverable bodyguard satellites. By the same token, though, they don't exactly know what it is. It's just the point that a special access project, something in space, weaponed, being released. We're at this kind of Star Wars stuff. The point that I kind of want to make here, though, is that this is basically going to force every other country around the world to follow suit. How could they not? And in forcing every other country to follow suit, what does it mean in the context of military? What does it mean in the context of cooperation? What does it mean even from the standpoint of what type of weapons that get put in space and whether or not those weapons could have larger consequences if there's a mistake in space on somebody else's country or somebody else's soil? This is a dark, dark place. And again, the question is why? Part of the reason that they would want to do this is because if it's a secret, can't use it. How can you use it if it's a secret, right? If you have something like that in space, the moment that you try to use a device like that, the rest of the world is going to know that you're trying to use a device like that. The exposure for this is most likely because they want to be able to deal with it openly. They want to be able to talk about it, expand upon it, industry, et cetera, openly. And the problem is you probably can't do that if it's still in the black. They're trying to bring this stuff out into the light of day. I was reading some of the commentary on this, and right here, this gentleman, Mark Gurner, he's a physics teacher, analyst, advocate in tech. He makes the point they want declassification so they can test and deploy the weapon, which can't really be done covertly. They're trying to commit the United States and the world to space weapons. Worst of all, it may be weapons stationed in orbit. Now, there are other sorts of problems with this. War in space is not exactly the way it looks like on television. If you blow something up, let's say hit it with a missile or something like that, the debris is basically going to destroy your capability of sight and your capability of even having anything else in space. So it's probably not going to be a missile system that blows something up. That's going to be able to basically create problems all around the world. So then it becomes, okay, so what is it? Laser? Is it something else? And at this point, we don't know. The only thing we know is that there's a special access project that is most likely going to kick off another arms race, this time in space. Bill Nelson, shout out to Bill Nelson for being willing to cooperate. And, you know, we had this with the Soviet Union, right? The space race. You know, you had Sputnik. Then you had the U.S. John F. Kennedy. We're going to the moon and all of this stuff. And, you know, even then, the language was, we're going to the moon for freedom of space. We're going to the moon for democracy in space. All of this stuff. The reality of it was we just wanted some kind of military dominance, and the language that was being used was peace, you know, that type of stuff, peace at the barrel of a gun. This is no different in a very weird and unfortunately even worse way. It's one thing to have a race against another country in regards to space. It's another thing to get into an arms race. NASA wasn't an arms race, even though there might have been this kind of dominance in space and technology and everything else. This is different. This is different. I think this is very dark. What are your thoughts?
It's pretty natural. I don't see how we can avoid this kind of thing. Yeah. In my opinion, pushing for like a planetary
treaty.
federation or a treaty. Hey, sure, treaty sounds good until it doesn't.
Until they blow it off, which is what
until they blow it off, which is what inevitably happens at a certain point. It's like, okay, you can, again, you can put boundaries around these things until somebody comes along and decides that it's worth cutting them, decides it's worth crossing them. And so, in some sense, this is inevitable. You're right that they wouldn't use missiles because that's a sort of, well, I damn hope you're right.
I hope I'm right. I mean, honestly, they've done things, they've done things that I have, you know, that I would never do. So it's possible.
That's the kind of thing that, like, if you want to stop any possibility of space flight, at least within the next century or whatever, you do that. You know, if you're like an Earth cult, which sounds kind of cool, actually. But if you're very opposed to like traveling outside this planet, you do that just to keep us from like sending more satellites and sending rockets and doing all that, because of course it's intensely prohibitive. Yeah. You know, like you're saying, all this space debris, near Earth debris that is building up slowly. You just be adding to it. Now, what would it be? Like you're saying, it's speculation. Yeah. Maybe electromagnetic pulses. We're talking lasers. Theoretically, they wrap the satellites in a Faraday cage.
Well, they're saying it could take out ships or satellites.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's...
It could apply to both.
Yeah, it could apply to both. I mean, they're going to use the argument, oh, it's defensive. Nonsense. It's a weapon. And the other weird part about this has to do with the way not other countries are going to have to deal with it. At a certain point, it looks like you don't get any more bang for your buck. Like at a point where both of us have a military capacity where any war or any fight basically destroys everything, then it seems like your capacity for war basically goes away, and yet not. Because they're still trying to find ways to put weapons in space. And what also just sucks about this, you have basically weapon contractors. For example, Afghanistan, $2 trillion for the Afghanistan thing went to like 9 companies, if I'm not mistaken, give or take. But that's a huge amount of money that was basically dumped into a very small number of groups and companies. What about this? Is there an incentive for congressmen, for people in military, especially people who are in this kind of revolving door, to support something like this, knowing full well that it's going to basically start an arms race in space across the world? Yes. That's a fiscal interest.
Yeah, they're going to do it.
Horrible.
Agreed. They're going to do that kind of thing. It's pretty much inevitable. And I'm very curious to see the details of the technology. Partly because right now I'm like, it's just genuine scientific curiosity.
I just want to know what it is.
I just want to know what it is. Exactly. I want to know what they're thinking.
They're talking about capability, like they're going to show it at some point.
And we were, I think you first brought this up last week. Any sign of when we're going to learn more about this?
So it sounds like the thing in Afghanistan basically pushed it, just like COVID eventually pushed it. They wanted to do it during Space Force to show, hey, we have Space Force and here's this new weapon or something like that. Well, COVID got in the way. There seems to be something that keeps getting in the way of them releasing this. Yeah. But I do think, the why is interesting, like the why now. Yeah. And what is the point of this? And look, like I said, the moment that you expose something like this to the rest of the world is going to start doing the same.
Yeah. We have our guest on the line. I think we should go to him. We're going to be coming back in a minute with Scott Ritter, talking Afghanistan and more. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want to record it.
Let's talk about that.
discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We are going to have a conversation with Scott Ritter about what is taking place in Afghanistan. There was an op-ed, I think this was a few days ago, from a group at the top part of northern Afghanistan that was basically saying the resistance starts now. And the op-ed, the point of the op-ed was to try to get support, assistance, weapons, et cetera, with this notion of pushing back against the Taliban. My question becomes, what is this resistance? And is this resistance going to be something that is supported either through Europe or through the United States, or let's just say countries in the West, as a way of basically continuing this kind of clandestine struggle against the Taliban? To have a conversation, we're joined with Scott Ritter. He's a former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. You can follow Scott on Twitter at @RealScottRitter. Scott, what's going on? Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
So let's get into that for the moment. The op-ed was basically making the point that the resistance starts now. And it's like, okay, resistance, what do you mean resistance? We were there for 20 years. And despite that, they're basically asking for support, resources, and assistance to carry on the fight against the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. I guess the first question is, what is this group? And I guess the secondary question is, will they get that clandestine assistance to keep up this, I don't know what you want to call it, fight, struggle, insurgency? What are your thoughts?
Well, this group is trying to resurrect something that replicates what we call the Northern Alliance, which was it started out as an anti-Soviet resistance anchored in the personality of one man, Ahmed Massoud, who was a Tajik warlord who ruled over an area north of Kabul known as the Panjshir Valley, very difficult terrain. He became a legend, the Lion of the Panjshir, by resisting successive Soviet offenses that launched out of Kabul. We're talking very large division-sized efforts with tanks, helicopters, airplanes, tens of thousands of troops, and he defeated them all, and became, known as somebody that couldn't be beat. And when the Soviet Union left Afghanistan, his group became central to efforts to overthrow the communist regime of Najibullah, and then when Najibullah went away, Massoud became the defense minister of the new warlord group that took over. Eventually, that fell apart. The Taliban came in, and Massoud became the leader of the anti-Taliban resistance. So that's a long way of saying that the anti-Taliban resistance that they're trying to replicate didn't happen overnight. It was born out of a very combat-capable organization that had been fighting the Soviets, fighting the communist regime, and then went on to fight the Taliban. In its later years, it was supported by the CIA that was running missions out of Tajikistan, sending money so that weapons could be purchased through established lines of communication and sources in Pakistan. It is also being supported by Iran, who was sending Qasem Soleimani, a name that you might recognize, the major general who was assassinated by the United States. He was somebody who was facilitating coordination with the Northern Alliance because of the ethnic linkage. The Tajik speak a form of Farsi, which of course is the language of Iran, and so the Iranians were providing support. The Russians were providing support via Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, and then of course the Pakistanis were helping. So the Northern Alliance succeeded in becoming a bastion against the Taliban during the period of, say, 1996 to 2001, because they received, millions of dollars of support from a variety of nations. Now, this group says we want to become the new resistance, but what is their foundation? There is no foundation. They don't have an organization that has been fighting for the last 20 years against the Taliban, so to speak. They're trying to cobble one together. One of the main players is Massoud's son. But Massoud's son doesn't have the resume, doesn't have the cachet. He doesn't have the legendary aspect of resistance attached to him. He just has a name, and that's not enough. There's also a man named Saleh, who's a vice president, former head of the Afghan intelligence service, and he has fled to the Panjshir region, taking with him hundreds, maybe a few thousand of the former CIA-trained commandos that used to fight against the Taliban. And then Dostum, an Uzbek warlord, is apparently coming down from Mazar-e Sharif and joining up with thousands of additional fighters. But just because you have a couple thousand men and you have a couple leaders doesn't mean you have a resistance. And this is the problem. They will not be able to continue unless they receive significant support from the United States, from Russia, from Pakistan. And the question is, do any one of those nations really want to create something that engenders instability into a region that many are hoping, with the advent of the Taliban taking over, can, for the first time in more than 40 years, operate without violence? So I think that this resistance group isn't long for this world. I don't see them receiving the kind of assistance necessary. I don't see the CIA stepping up and saying, yeah, we need to back these people. I don't see the Russians agreeing to that. Even if the CIA wanted, where are they going to base out of? I don't see the Russians allowing them to use Tajikistan or Uzbekistan. And I don't think the Pakistanis want to continue this. Remember, the Pakistanis threw their weight behind the Taliban, and now the Taliban have won. I think the Pakistanis want to consolidate their geopolitical victory there rather than fomenting unrest. So, that's in a nutshell what I think is going on.
That makes sense. I'm sort of always looking for, okay, but what if this or what if that? The only case in which I could see a country deciding to do that is we don't know how the Taliban is going to run its country. We don't know if they're going to successfully wrangle, a lot of the membership who could become mujahideen terrorists in neighboring countries if they don't properly manage things. And so, in other words, if for countries in the region who are worried about a stable instability, who are worried about the Taliban maintaining stability but spreading terror regionally, they could see, the Panjshir resistance as a means to control and oppose and influence the country. It's just, that's expensive, and who knows what's going to happen with the Taliban right now? Who knows, whether or not they're going to be able to, gain that control over their own population. Does that make sense? Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? What do you think I'm missing there, Scott?
Well, I don't think you're missing anything. I can guarantee you that there are elements in the CIA today are making just that very argument, that we need to hedge our bets, and we need to, already the CIA is involved, if only because Saleh, the vice president, former head of the intelligence service, is a CIA agent. He's bought and paid for by the CIA. He was used by the CIA to create the so-called zero units, 01, 02, 03, which were elite commando units used to assassinate Taliban leaders. And it's these zero units that are up there. So the CIA already has a secret army operating as part of this resistance. The question is, does the CIA cut off contact? The CIA never cuts off contact. Understand that. They may not give you the same amount of money they once gave you, et cetera, but the CIA is a human intelligence organization. That's their specialty. And once they develop a human asset, they will maintain contact with it. So the CIA is in contact with Saleh, is in contact with the CIA-trained operatives that are in the Panjshir right now. And the question is, what do we, what does the United States do with this capability? Because it's viewed as a capability. We have this capability in place, is what they're saying. Now, what do we do with it? Do we sustain it just enough to keep it there so that we can, breathe life into it if needed, if the Taliban start to export terrorism?
Exactly.
We work with it to, reintegrate with the Taliban because we believe in greater peace. The CIA doesn't believe in greater peace. Or do we, build it up and create a viable resistance group, which I believe is the CIA model. And that's what the paramilitary officers at the CIA right now are arguing for. I believe 100% that they're saying we need to breathe life in this. We need to give money to this. We need to turn this into, a long-term resistance that can take down the Taliban. Whether or not the political leadership in Washington, D.C. will agree to that is another thing.
Well, do they even need the agreement in order to keep the asset open? I mean, I think that's probably is more likely than anything else, right? I mean, the goal of it is we don't want to lose our potential to have some level of influence in the country, even if it's somewhat of a long shot, which means that they could be clandestine support just to keep that in effect or the potential in effect.
No, and of course, but the point is CIA, regardless of what people think, is not an independent operator, and it will have to get presidential authority to do that. Now, the Biden administration may very well issue what they call a finding, a presidential finding, which is a classified directive by the president authorizing the CIA to carry out covert activities. Then this would be briefed to a very small number of congressional leaders, because at the end of the day, the CIA receives money from U.S. taxpayers via Congress, so Congress has to be kept informed, but it will not be part of the public discourse. But it would require a presidential finding. Let me tell you why this probably won't happen, or I can't say probably won't happen, why this may not happen. One, we right now, I don't think people understand just how much the Taliban controls what's going on with this evacuation. The American media makes it seem like, we're in charge, we're dictating the pace of operations, et cetera. This is just a bald-faced lie. We know that the head of Central Command, General McKenzie, has met with the Taliban leadership in Doha to negotiate the terms of American military presence at Hamid Karzai International Airport. This meeting took place on or about August 16th. We know that the director of CIA flew into Kabul to meet with the Taliban leadership to negotiate, again, the terms of Taliban cooperation with the Americans on the ground. We know that a rear admiral, head of the SEALs, is meeting with the Taliban on a daily basis. And the point I'm trying to make is we're negotiating with the Taliban. We're working with the Taliban. And to sit there and say we want to fund a resistance throws away this human intelligence capacity. So the president's going to have to be weighing a decision that says, if we support covert resistance in Panjshir, we're undermining the extensive linkage we already have with the Taliban. If we want to influence the Taliban, we're better off by using these diplomatic, these intelligence, these military links, rather than kicking a hornet's nest by supporting a resistance that probably won't succeed.
And to be clear, what is the resistance right now? Literally, it is a person, a valley, and then the hundreds, not thousands or tens of thousands, but hundreds. I think I saw it was in the Washington Post. I think it was the New York Times too. Those are the numbers they're citing. Hundreds of people fleeing. Those aren't the tens of thousands. Those aren't the battalions that you were talking about rolling out with tanks earlier. So clearly, outnumbered, soon to be overwhelmed. And the only thing is, the Taliban, I guess we might even be able to speculate a timeline here. Taliban, since there's nothing there, should be able to roll them over very quickly here, right? And therefore, in a couple of weeks or a month, how quickly do you think this could go? This is speculation, but this might not be something we're going to be talking about for very long from the sounds of it, Scott, right?
The Taliban's already sent thousands of fighters into the region, and just based on the stories that I'm reading, you hear the resistance saying, "Oh, well, the Taliban are going door to door in the villages." Well, I'll tell you what. When Massoud was in charge of the valley, nobody was going door to door in the villages because he owned the villages. Yeah. Got near the villages because they died in the valley coming up. So it means that the resistance has already melted away into the hills, not even trying to hold the population centers. And the other thing is, much of this resistance is coming from forces that have been heavily engaged in combat with the Taliban since May. And the reason why I bring that up is they've exhausted their supplies. The reason why they're in Panjshir is that they've had to retreat from previous battlefields because they had no ammunition. They had no fuel. They had no food. They had no water. That's why they had to retreat. They have a lot of fighting spirit, but they've got nothing to fight with. They can pose with uniforms and weapons, but one short firefight, and they'll blow their basic combat load, and then they've got nothing, and then they die. And that's just the reality of what's going to happen. Unless somebody immediately starts providing them with significant stocks of ammunition, of heavy weaponry, these guys are going to be defeated in the course of weeks, if not months. The Taliban has a extremely capable special operations command that they've already sent to the Panjshir. These guys have ammunition. They have heavy weapons. They have the ability to sustain the fight, and they're going to crush the resistance unless they receive support. And I know right now there's a CIA paramilitary officer pounding the table in Washington, D.C. We got to support these guys. We got to give them ammunition, blah, blah, blah. But, that may play well on TV and in Hollywood, but his management is looking at him saying, we don't have any support from the executive branch. And if you don't have support from the executive branch, none of this happens.
Very interesting. Scott, I want to go into Biden's decisions or the decisions he was confronted with. The G7 summit, they had a virtual meeting where many of them in Europe kept pushing Biden to basically stay. They wanted him to go beyond August 31st. The Taliban had said that was a red line, that you need to have your people out before that time. CIA director goes to talk, goes to speak with Taliban leader on Monday. And, this meeting ideally was supposed to kind of work out how to get the rest of the Americans out of the country. By the same token, I always thought it was somewhat farcical that it was Joe Biden had a practical choice in remaining in the country. What basically was he presented with? I mean, it just didn't seem like staying there to August 31st was viable. And there's a secondary point to that, which Biden keeps saying, okay, we're going to bring out some of our Afghan interpreters and people who basically assisted with the occupation. But the Taliban has basically said, yeah, that's not going to continuously happen. What is he confronted with on the ground?
Well, let's start from the beginning. When Joe Biden became president, he inherited a reality. All right, and people need to understand that it's not as though he was able to formulate policy from scratch. He inherited reality. The reality is that the U.S. military has been working with the Taliban to fight ISIS Khorasan since 2016. That's just a reality. He inherited a situation where most Americans, if you ask them, would say, no, we're at war with the Taliban. Since 2016, we've been shifting away from a war with the Taliban towards military coordination and cooperation with the Taliban because we recognize the inevitability of their victory, and we also recognize that we needed them to defeat ISIS. That's one reality. Two, he had a diplomatic reality. We had a negotiated peace treaty with the Taliban that was negotiated by the Trump administration. And that basically was a legally binding document. Now, Biden could have broken that, but then you weigh into the factor that the CIA has been working with the Taliban. There's a reason why we knew the government was going to collapse, because we probably were helping facilitate the collapse of the Afghan government. And what I mean by that is that we were knowledgeable of Taliban intent, and we did little or nothing to stop it because we recognized that we can't keep this government on life support. So these were all realities that Joe Biden had when he came in, and then when it came time to pull the plug, I'm starting to take a different look at this. At first, I was saying that what's going on in Kabul was total chaos, unplanned. No, I'm thinking now, the more I look at it, the more I reevaluate the strong linkage, the strong connectivity between the Biden administration and the Taliban on an entire, wide, broad spectrum of levels. That this has been a very carefully choreographed humanitarian tragedy, but one that, it was the only way we were going to get, the numbers of people out of Afghanistan that we needed to get out. Burns went there on Monday not to negotiate what's going on now. He went there to negotiate what's going to go on after August 31st. After August 31st, there are going to be still hundreds, if not thousands, of Americans in Afghanistan. And we need to ensure that we have connectivity with the Taliban that is constructive in nature, that will allow these Americans to be withdrawn.
I'm incredulous about this, Scott. I want to push back because, the idea that much of this was planned, I had also been coming around and we've been having conversations on the air and off about, different versions of that. But when you say this is a sort of carefully choreographed humanitarian crisis, roughly your words, in order to try to get people out, why do you think that was necessary? Because the alternative, an orderly withdrawal, you get everybody out that you need to get out before the time that you're supposed to get out, and you maintain your military forces in the region until you say you're going to pull them out, and then you do. You get your people out. That's the sort of natural. That's what I would imagine would be the optimal scenario. Why do you say this one is preferable to that for some?
Well, let's just keep in mind that Joe Biden is a political animal. How many Americans knew about the extensive contacts between the United States and the Taliban prior to this current crisis? None. Most Americans thought we were at war with the Taliban. All right, so in order for this to go a different way, Joe Biden would have to get in front of the American people and say, I've been secretly in contact with the Taliban. We've been doing X, Y, and Z. That's a political nightmare. He has to maintain a certain amount of theater. The theater involves sending thousands of American troops to take control of an airport, to evacuate these people from a hostile situation. And that sounds good until you realize we put thousands of American troops into a trap. That unless we had the cooperation of the Taliban, if this was truly a hostile effort by the United States, they'd all be dead right now because you can't survive in Kabul International Airport. You're in the middle of a landlocked country with a single runway, and the Taliban could shut it down at any time they want. And then we run out of ammunition, and then we die. And
so you're looking at that thinking, this is ludicrous. There must be some kind of thought process, and you're trying to figure out sort of what that is. Is that right, Scott?
There's no way General McKenzie would have allowed this to take place unless he had assurances from the Taliban that they would not attack American troops.
And look, on some level, it does make sense, right? That these guys on some level were working together. And yeah, he makes a deal. They have conversations. And if I'm not mistaken, there were conversations that was going on prior between the United States and the Taliban. And like you said, there was the meeting between, the deals that were arranged between Trump and the Taliban. But I do think this has been so chaotic, though. I mean, like from the standpoint of Biden being able to explain what has been taking place, just to bolster Shane's point for a moment, to explain what has been taking place, Biden seemed incapable of doing so all the way through. He's coming out saying, hey, there's no reason this is going to look like Vietnam. They have an air force and they have 300,000 people. Well, we found out that wasn't true. I mean, they basically was like a sixth of that. And then you go to later on and Joe Biden is saying Americans can get to the airport when they need to. You found out that wasn't true. Meaning it just seems like at each point along the way, he didn't seem to know what was going on. And so I can agree with, I can see the connection between Taliban and the United States, but it didn't seem like Joe Biden had his finger on the pulse of this to the degree where I could look at that and think to myself that these guys are in the room.
Well, when you... First of all, we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of informed speculation, but, I'm speculating here.
That's fair.
I don't have absolute knowledge about what's going on. But if, when I'm pretty good at putting pieces together and saying, there's something going on here. That's what I used to do for a living for a long time. And I will say this, anytime you have a politician selling a lie and the lie starts to unravel, they don't look like they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because remember, he can't know what he's looked like he's doing if he's trying to sell a lie, trying to create. The entire objective here was to try and get out of this with as little political fallout, negative political fallout as possible. No, Saigon imagery. Well, wait a minute. If you're planning an evacuation in the hostile, under hostile circumstances, there's going to be Saigon imagery. I mean, that's just the reality is. But the reason why you're saying no Saigon imagery is because he knew this was a farce. But the problem is we have to look. If the Taliban was truly, the hostile element that people say they are, they never would have allowed American helicopters to fly out to pick people up. That only happened because the Taliban green-lighted it and said, yeah, come on in. Here you go. Land here. Pick these people up. Get them out. They would never allow, everybody's like, oh, the British are surging into Kabul to rescue people through Kabul. No, they're not. They're driving through Kabul in vehicles carefully marked by the Taliban on routes pre-approved by the Taliban to do what the Taliban says they can do. We're not in control of Kabul. We're not in control of any aspect of Kabul. All this stuff about, surging out and doing this and doing that and doing this is garbage. There may be a handful of cases where in the dead of the night, a U.S. Special Operations helicopter goes out in coordination with the CIA to grab a CIA asset. Somebody that we own that needs help, needs to get out. We don't want to identify who this person is. That probably has happened. But again, the Taliban's basically said, you guys do what you need to do by August 31st. And then all bets are off. So if you want to play games, want to play spy games, you want to put guys on helicopters and fly around in the night and pick people up in dramatic fashion, go ahead. We don't care. But it has to be done by August 31st. And this is what's going on. This is all grand theater. Now, when I say theater, though, unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of extras out there. Tens of thousands of Afghan civilians who haven't gotten the script, who basically think the United States is there to get them out.
They could be killed. No, they didn't get. Well, we gave them the script, and they're still reading the lines, and it was just a script for us all along, or something like that. It wasn't reality, But here's the thing: we were pretty darn close to closing. You've given us something new to think about. I'm still not sure I buy it. And here's my sort of last thought: why? Unless Biden and the White House and just the American establishment in general, but say Biden, just to take him, unless he thought, okay, we're going to do this, but I'm not going to tell any of my European allies. If that's the thought process, this is such a diplomatic disgrace the world around, and Britain and France, and admittedly, they seem like they're going to get their people out, not necessarily their allies, their Afghan allies out, but they're in such a desperate situation, and it's our responsibility ultimately. And if this was intentional on Biden's part, they didn't get the message, and I'm really not worried. Worried isn't the wrong word, but the repercussions of this diplomatically going into, the near decades into the future in terms of the fate of the international community, the role of the United States at the center of this world order. I think you see what I'm saying, that all of our counterparties and all of our allies, I can't help but feel that that this is a huge embarrassment for us and that they're less than impressed with our behavior. And so I think you see what I'm saying. We got to come back on that some other time with you. We were joined by Scott Ritter. Good conversation with him. Scott Ritter, for those listening, former UN weapons inspector and a weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. Follow Scott on Twitter at @RealScottRitter. We're closing this hour out, coming back in a minute with headlines and another 2 hours of this morning show. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I'm your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would mean you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, great conversation with Scott. Love that conversation. I like his analysis. All right, let's get into the headlines. In the news, about 170,772 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 1,470 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 152,341 cases per day, an increase in 23% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 52% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 61% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 38,364,779 people across the United States and has killed 632,522 human beings. Great. Florida is the only state in the United States where most people, or more people, are dying of COVID now than at any point in the pandemic. Last summer, there had been a previous record of 185 deaths per day, but a few days ago, Florida's rate has increased to 200 a day consistently and even hit 228. Ron DeSantis is doing phenomenal in Florida. Absolutely phenomenal. As part of her full first day in office, Governor Kathy Hochul revealed 12,000 more New Yorkers that have died from COVID than was previously reported. This decree further divides the new government from her predecessor and asks who is lying to play to their agenda more. I gotta be honest, I don't think she has I don't know what her agenda would be in disclosing the deaths, but it looks bad. And it looks bad for Cuomo. Mississippi has now quarantined about 15% of all K-12 public school students this month, either for positive COVID-19 cases or known exposures. The 65,525 kids who have been ordered to isolate includes 11,766 who have tested positive. Wow. New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has said she would stick with the strategy of a nationwide lockdown in order to fight a rising number of cases. This has become increasingly unpopular as the number of cases in the recent outbreak continue to rise. Ardern said that the health experts and advisors have advised her to continue with the elimination approach. Vietnam is sending 2,000 soldiers to a manufacturing hub to help contain an outbreak there, which health officials say could see another 50,000 cases in the next 2 weeks. The province is the site of plants or many foreign manufacturers. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has issued another executive order doubling down on his ban on vaccine mandates. The governor tested positive last week despite being fully vaccinated. In national news, the first person in the kidnapping plot of Governor Gretchen Whitmer has been given 6 years in prison for his role in the crime. Ty Garbin was the only one in the group to admit guilt, while the other accomplices still tried to win their case under entrapment. Garbin testified to many of the group's training practices, including a shoot house with a similar layout as Governor Whitmer's house, which they frequently raided to practice. Inmates in Northwest Arkansas jail have been prescribed ivermectin to treat their coronavirus cases. Oh, that's horrendous. The drug is aggressive antiparasitical medication that has been only given approval as head lice and parasitic worm treatments. Federal health officials even warned states that ivermectin should not be used to treat COVID-19 as it could cause serious harm. Oh, that's horrendous. They should not be given that.
And apparently, here's the actually controversial part from Austin. They're using the inmates effectively as lab rats. You know, that's the thing, because we don't know that it works. I was arguing for it,
guinea pigs.
but we don't know that it works, and so without any proof of the thing, they're giving it to people. That's ethically fraught.
That's an understatement. Ethically fraught is an understatement. I mean, some of the lab tests, they've had double-blind studies and all this stuff that basically have not shown effect beyond a placebo. the idea that they're giving this in this kind of official capacity is, well, yeah, the problems with that, big time. Large numbers of people waiting to escape Taliban rule remain outside Kabul airport despite the threats of an impending terror attack by ISIS. Britain's armed minister said that the threat was severe. Sadly, it's also the case that the evacuation flights may not be able to get everyone out in time. Pakistan's open border crossing are also seeing large crowds of people attempting to seek refuge in a neighboring state. Tigrayan authorities said the Ethiopian government blockade has left 1 million people on the brink of starvation. Abiy Ahmed's government has blamed the Tigrayan rebels. Tigrayan officials said the local health system has been crippled. A situation caused health problems and problems with COVID. I love the fact that the Tigrayan rebels, the people who basically caused all this, are now blaming and pointing fingers at the other people. That's great.
Well, but the Ethiopian government's been pretty brutal with it too, as far as
they have been pretty brutal. But keep in mind,
the Tigrayan regime was brutal before Abiy Ahmed took power. It's just a cycle of
the cycle of violence. Not to mention the Eritreans, the war that had been going on. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is the Tigrayan rebels didn't want to give up power and control and was provoking a conflict on top of it. Now they're screaming that they want their own region and everything else.
And that's also always been their thing. Think about the name of the organization is the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. What does that sound like to you? It sounds like a separatist movement to me, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's been their thing. Yeah. That's my point. It's not a surprise. It's still not good. It's still,
the separatist movement thing is weird though. I mean, if you think about it, they had control of that country for like 20-something years or more. They basically took the resources, took the supplies, all of that stuff, and enriched themselves. And now the liberation thing is wild. But yeah, I mean, they are calling for their own separate place.
Yeah.
And the people who I've known who have been Ethiopians, who have family members, they are like shocked by it. Not shocked. Shocked is the wrong word for it. It's this mixed, weird situation of they're Ethiopians, regardless of what political affiliation they consider themselves. But also, I've heard people say, if they want to leave, leave. I don't want this conflict, or I don't want this kind of civil war stuff going on. So yeah, it's just pretty wild. The TPLF has certain associations because they were in power for so long, with the West. And so it's like the things that you hear, or the loud part of it, comes from previous associations. At least that's the belief of people who are in Ethiopia that I've talked to.
Absolutely dark humor, but do you remember, you ever see Life of Brian, Monty Python, the movie?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
There's the Judean People's Front. No, it's the People's Front of Judea. Tigray. No, it's the People's Front of Tigray. No, it's stupid. It's dark humor, but...
Yeah, it's not a good situation either way.
No.
And they have been pretty rough. You've heard of Takis. You've been obsessed with Flaming Hot Cheetos. Now you can enjoy your favorite beverage under the same trend. Flamin' Hot Mountain Dew has announced that it will launch on the company's site. Oh, God, on Tuesday. Yeah, you guys are listening to Fault Line. Those are your headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. That, makes something come up in the back of my throat a little bit when I think about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's so gross.
Because
it sounds like, because the first time you read it, I was like, okay, it's just a hot Mountain Dew. But now I'm realizing they're talking about basically a Flaming Hot Cheeto version of Mountain Dew. Is that what this is?
I'm going to be honest. There is a drink. This wasn't making sense to me earlier, but now I'm reminded of a drink that I had from Trader Joe's where it's like a spicy mango thing or something like this.
Yeah.
And that actually was kind of good. It was really weird.
Yeah.
You just keep drinking it and it gets tastier. And it's like that maybe.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't sound savory. It doesn't sound appetizing. It doesn't sound
Flaming
good.
Hot Cheeto Mountain Dew just sounds wild.
Hello, everyone.
What's
This
going
is
on,
also
Austin?
producer Austin here.
Producer Austin in the house.
To clarify, it's not Cheeto flavor.
Oh, good.
It's just
Okay.
Flamin' Hot, quote unquote, has been going around as such a trend, a craze. And so Mountain Dew's jumping on the train.
I see.
So they're making their own
Thank you.
version of Flamin' Hot.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Because I was like, oh, yeah. I cringed at that. What's up, Austin?
How you guys doing?
All right, so I called Austin in here because you were commenting on something. Remember, you were reading the Kathy Hochul headline?
Yes.
And there was the agenda bit at the end. Kathy Hochul, new governor of New York, taking over for Andrew Cuomo, disgraced governor. And she came out with these 12,000 new nursing home deaths that apparently he hid. That just hit yesterday. Anyway, at the end of that headline, Austin had written something about an agenda of hers. And you were like, what agenda does she have?
Yeah.
And he started to explain it. And so I was like,
yeah, come on, explain it. Because it's like if you come in, does she have an incentive to separate herself from Cuomo? Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, all things being equal, but that's secondary to whether or not she would have exposed it, whether she had an agenda or not. I mean, it's the 12,000 deaths. It doesn't hurt her at all to expose it, does it? I mean, there's no negative for her to expose something that is entirely the fault of the previous governor?
Well, I mean, it depends. If everyone loved Cuomo, it would be in her best interest to be as closely aligned to him as possible.
If that was the case, he wouldn't be out.
Because it would be like if you said I'm the legitimate child of Ronald Reagan and I'm running for office, all the Republicans are going to go, yes.
Austin, I get that. But that's not our situation. The situation is Cuomo is on his way out. He would have gotten impeached, and he is leaving in disgrace after basically hiding a lot of dead grandmas and touching people inappropriately.
Right, which is why I'm saying that this does also help her agenda.
It is an agenda.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. What's the agenda? And
the
what
agenda is the 2022 the election, gubernatorial election.
Oh,
so the further she can distance herself from Cuomo now, I mean, she's running on a shorter term than most other governors to prove herself that, hey, I can do this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's only a matter of time until we fall out of love with our governors. And if she can keep them in good graces for another year, when the election comes around, she's secured her spot as governor. Otherwise, she's got to go through and go against some pretty strong candidates.
Yeah. And yeah, I can understand that. That makes sense. If it's purely for that, I guess my thing is,
I don't think it's purely.
Well, she have exposed the 12,000 either way, and I feel it. Yes, because I don't necessarily see how it's a negative for her either way.
Also, why the first day in office? So did she have the numbers ready to go?
That's the interesting part too.
Or maybe if it was her first day in office, she said, "Okay, we're going to do a thorough investigation. We're going to look through all the things again, and then afterwards she comes out with a new number." But she had the number on the top of her head.
That's the wild part. That is the wild part. How did she get that number so fast? Where was the number hiding so fast?
When you sign into governor, it's like they hand you a book of here's some government secrets.
Is that what you think?
It's like when you're president, you're like, where is Area 51 now?
Well, the wild part is, from our understanding, there was a separation between Hochul and Cuomo anyway. Like there was a division between them two.
Yes.
That's what Goodwin was saying.
I believe, told us. Yeah, they didn't particularly like each other.
Yeah. And so it's weirder that she would have that data on hand, if that makes sense. Like, how did she go through and get that data that fast?
Because it's better for her to say it on her first day as governor than for her to say it.
How did she get it? Like, did somebody disclose it?
That's the question.
She had to have had it before.
Yes.
She had to.
Yeah.
There was. I don't see how else, she would have been able to get her hands on it that fast.
But she can either use it as a tool to take down Cuomo, or she can use it as her own political tool to bring her up once she's in.
Yeah.
So now she looks better, and Cuomo's already going down, so she doesn't need to hit him harder, beat the dead horse. Yeah. She can just say, like, hey, look at how much better I am. I'm all for the truth of the people and all that.
Yeah, it's good politics, right?
And the further she can distance herself from Cuomo, Democrats will love her.
Yeah.
Because Democrats now hate Cuomo. Republicans have always hated Cuomo. So, I mean, the further she distances them, the more she secures her seat.
Yeah. So your point is, it's in her political interests to create the separation and also to be considered honest.
Yes.
That's fair. I guess to me, it was like she would have disclosed this anyway, because there's no negative for her to disclose.
Yeah, but I mean, I think her tactics of doing it were
partisan.
Yeah.
That's possible.
I think it makes sense. I think it's a good explanation.
There's a logic to it, yeah.
It's 100%. I think the word agenda is valid. And producer Austin Pelly.
Wait, what's that? On the next guest, so.
No, you guys busy in the other room. Austin Pelly joining us just for a minute to get into that story. Good conversation, and I see where he's coming from.
Yeah, it makes sense. Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
That's funny. I am very curious now. I'm glad he brought that up. How did she get her hands on that information that fast?
Yes.
First day, she has a separation from Cuomo, meaning there's a distinction there. So it's not like these guys are close together where she knows everything that's. How did she know that there were 12,000 more? And if they did a review, how were they able to find it that fast when she gets in office?
I don't see that.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, no,
it doesn't seem like enough time for a review.
Of course it makes sense.
Yeah.
You can sort of play this out. Say that she doesn't know anything until she gets into an office. There are two options then. One, an inside review. Somebody on the inside of the administration comes to her with a report and is like, hey, you didn't know this, but you really should. I'll come back to that. Second option, somebody from outside.
Yeah.
She gets random tips. That makes no sense to me. She would want to take a lot more time to vet it, for one thing. Even the first one, though, that also doesn't make sense to me. She would still want to vet it.
Yeah.
The timing is just too damn convenient. So she would have to have it, I think. Seems very probable that she has it before she gets put into the seat. Probably in that transitional period, but who knows? It's speculation.
If true, that becomes problematic for her.
Maybe, but maybe she can play that. But here's the other side of this. And I brought this up earlier. Will this resurrect that story? If you see this as an agenda, if you see this as her intentionally bringing this up, well, it clearly is. She's trying to resurrect that story. She's trying to bring that back up. Now, why would she do that? Because Cuomo made all these mistakes, And if she can start her governorship off by cleaning house, this will never happen again, really clearly dissecting what went wrong, that's a good start for her.
It is a good start. But I think you guys are being a little bit more partisan than I think this is breaking out to be. She gets in office. She finds there's 12,000 more people dead. Do you sit on that information or do you disclose it? I don't see anybody sitting on that information at this point. So it's that part. It's like, are there political benefits for her to disclose? Of course they are. It makes Cuomo look horrible. It makes her look that much better. It makes her look honest and everything else. So yeah, there are political bonuses and incentives for her to do it. But I guess the catch is, let's say they weren't, would she still have disclosed the 12,000? Is that something you want to sit on after Cuomo is basically being taken out on the rail for basically doing the same thing? I guess my thing is every push and every incentive is for her to disclose, politically and just for her own sense of sanity.
But she might not have wanted to do it in this way if she didn't want to make this her thing. Yeah. She could have handed it to somebody else who could come up with a report if she wanted. She can have it see the light of day while not airing it out very publicly like she did on her first day after taking the position. That's intentional.
And that's the other part. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
that's
of course
very
it was intentional.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And also, again, when did she know? That's the part that's fascinating to me now.
She might get into a little bit of trouble, but we'll see.
Well, right, because if she knew in advance, let's say this was something that, okay, she had this information prior, then what?
I don't.
But again, she might not have had the information prior.
I don't know, but here's the thing. Do we even, is it worth her getting in trouble? Or should we all be focusing instead on the forgotten story, which is Cuomo killing people?
I don't think she's going to get in trouble.
You know what I mean?
I'm just uber curious on when did she know?
Yeah. No,
and how did she get the data?
It's the sort of interesting, I don't know, scandalous almost side of this one. Let's take it into our break. We're going to be coming back with Mark Sloboda. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short one.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host, James Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Early on, I think in the previous week or earlier this week, we were having a conversation that some of the countries, Russia, China, Iran, have been open to diplomacy with the Taliban. They've taken the government at this point, and if you're going to have any deals or any kind of association to try to make any agreements, well, you're going to have to deal with the ruling government as is. That just so happens to be the Taliban. A story came out this morning, though, with, right here, 4 Russian military planes evacuated Russian and other nationals from Kabul on Wednesday on orders of President Vladimir Putin as Moscow held military exercises with tanks in neighboring Tajikistan. Now, initially, the embassy for Russia stayed open, but at this point, the concern is that there are either threats on the ground that is making it unsafe for nationals or people affiliated with Russia to remain there, in which case, evacuations. To have a conversation about what's going on the ground and Russia's, I don't even know if this is a change in point of view or change in perspective, but more so at the very least pulling its people out. Basically, what is occurring on the ground and how has that affected the Russian perspective of events? To have a conversation, we're joined with Mark Sloboda. Mark Sloboda is an international relations and security analyst. Mark, thank you for joining us on short notice.
Shane, Jamarl, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on Fault Lines.
Absolutely, and it's always a pleasure to have you. I saw the story, and you were the first person that I thought of. Initially, there was diplomatic overtures by Russia to Taliban, and that seemed to be one of the things where it was, all right, there seems to be a bit of calm or a bit of security on the ground now that the Taliban is basically taken over, especially considering how long the war had been going on in the occupation. Well, this seems to be somewhat of a change in policy, whereas now they're pulling out Russians and people affiliated with the Russian government or certain nationals or people of interest. What has changed? Has the security situation deteriorated to such a degree that a policy change had to be implemented? What's going on?
Okay, so first of all, I would say that, compared to the first day and night of the Taliban takeover of Kabul, there is what is generally considered to be a deteriorating security situation. Much of that actually has to do with Western countries, the U.S., the control of the Kabul airport, and so on. But there is no actual change in policy, not by Russia. And there is an attempt to try to present it as such. Yeah. And this is because of statements, probably, I would say, overheated or exaggerated statements by the Russian ambassador to Afghanistan, Dmitry Zhernov, to the press in those opening days, where he made a number of statements that Russia is not evacuating its embassy, that its embassy will continue to function, which has not changed. Right, Russia is not evacuating its embassy. There are some extra embassy staff that have been evacuated, but that was from excess staff. That was already something that was already occurring on August 16th. So that is absolutely nothing new. And some of the families of members of people working in the embassy are being evacuated. Okay, and then nothing was ever said to the contrary in that way. The Russian embassy is still operating at full capacity, as it should be said. So are the embassies of China, of Pakistan, of Iran, and the embassies of the Central Asian states, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and so on. So this is mainly an exercise that Western countries, countries that have been actively involved in the military occupation of Afghanistan for the last 20 years, they are withdrawing all of their embassies, their staff, and their citizens. And the U.S. had tens of thousands of its citizens in Kabul. Most of those were security contractors, mercenaries. Of one form or another. And this was actually part of the original plan, was as the U.S. withdrew, the level of security contractors would increase and assume some of those duties to help defend the Afghan government, kind of a cloaked boots on the ground effect. But the Afghan National Security Forces collapsed, dissolved themselves so fast. And the Taliban took over Kabul basically without a shot, or many shots at least, being fired within a week. And that surprised everyone. And it has to be said, that surprised the Russian government as well. Russian generals were talking in the days before that mad rush, how they expected that the drive through big cities to Kabul would slow down, and the Afghan National Security Forces would begin to show more resistance, and Taliban gains would be reversed. And absolutely none of that happened. The Russians were as wrong as everyone else, when it comes to the speed with which the Taliban retook the country. Yeah. So there actually isn't any policy change, right? Much of it has been made because the Russian ambassador's statements, he specifically said that Kabul is safer today under the Taliban takeover than it was under Qazi.
Okay.
And that is probably false. actually. I when I first heard that, I thought, wow, that was a strong statement, and this is probably an attempt of Russian outreach to the Taliban to protect the people in their own embassy and to try to establish new relations. You have to remember the Taliban is considered a banned terrorist organization in Russia and has long been. And because, of course, because of the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan in 1989. Even 3 years before the collapse of the Afghan socialist government, Russia and the Taliban have not always been on the best of terms, needless to say. And Russia is not happy that the Afghan government has fallen to the Taliban. They would prefer not to see Afghanistan controlled by a terrorist group with a very strict interpretation of Islam, Wahhabism, that could be exported beyond its borders to Central Asian nations and parts of Russia that have Islamic majorities. That is something that they did not want, but they are ever pragmatic and realist. And as soon as the U.S. began negotiating with the Taliban to withdraw their forces, and this goes back several years into the Trump era, one of the reasons why there have not been any American casualties in Afghanistan for almost 2 years is because the U.S. worked out a deal with them. We'll withdraw our people, don't attack us while you're doing it. And that deal still holds to this day to the rushed air evacuations out of Kabul, with the Taliban already controlling Kabul. And as soon as that happened, the Russian government started negotiations with the Taliban because, they realized what inevitably at some point in time was going to be on the wall. And they still intend to try to establish diplomatic relations. At the same time, they're doing contingency military exercises with their military allies in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, reinforcing their presence on the border and doing military exercises to make clear that if there were any crazy incursions, military incursions by the Taliban into their allies' territory, that they would respond with military force if necessary. That being said, the Russian government has also made clear that they have absolutely zero intention of sending military forces into Afghanistan again, like say they did during the 1980s. And for one of the main reasons behind the futility of such a gesture, as the U.S., the Soviet Union and the U.S. demonstrated, is that it would be completely politically unacceptable by the Russian people, who have very bad memories of that period, much like Americans do of, say, Vietnam or Afghanistan again, and have absolutely it would be political suicide for the Putin administration to send military troops into Afghanistan. I think many other people, concur on that. Russia is maneuvering, and the ambassador words were I would say to an excess. There are a number of security threats on the ground. We have to remember that when Kabul fell before, previously, there was a lot of infighting among the groups. The Taliban actually didn't immediately take over Afghanistan when the socialist government. There were other Islamist groups in place first, and then the Taliban came along and displaced them. And there have been, disagreements within the Taliban themselves. They are not a monolith. And there are other military factions on the ground, right? ISIL or ISIS Khorasan, as it's called, ISIL-K, which is a branch of ISIS in Afghanistan. The Taliban have fought quite bitterly against them, contrary to a lot of popular understanding in the last few years, but they definitely have a small presence on the ground, and they, of course, would love to stir up trouble between the Taliban and the United States. There are plenty of people in the United States that do not want to see U.S. troops withdrawn from Afghanistan, and might be tempted to create incidents that would lead to an altercation between U.S. forces evacuating and the Taliban that might complicate matters. And there are a number of European countries. Europeans, the British, and the members of the EU are all extremely unhappy that the U.S. is abandoning them and abandoning Afghanistan, particularly the British. And there is already, talk of there is one spot of anti-Taliban active resistance in the country right now, and that is in the Panjshir Valley, where the Northern Alliance was actually in control during the entire Taliban 1.0 period in the 1990s. And the son of the previous rebel leader, an ethnic Tajik, Masood, the Panjshir Valley is almost entirely ethnic Tajik, while the Taliban is a largely Pashtun ethnic movement. And the now recently former vice president of Afghanistan, of the Afghan national government, Saleh, who was basically he's a CIA creature, he's also there. But there's no indication that they will actually be able to sustain any type of long-term resistance.
It seems
they
like
don't
they're
have
just going to
control
crumble.
of the border. Yeah, they're in negotiating. Actually, the Taliban are negotiating with them. As they are with basically every other faction, including the previous Afghan president, Karzai.
That last part's really good to hear.
And others. And they've actually put former Ghazni officials in office. A former security official has in Kabul for the previous government has been returned to his duties. And he's now in charge of security for Kabul. So they really do attempt to be making some efforts, right, towards
that's 100% the appearance. Yeah, towards restoring some stability in the country, getting along with the all of the previous, with all of the old guard basically. And of course, we were talking about the Panjshir resistance, and it seems doomed. We were talking about this with Scott Ritter last hour, but if they're negotiating with them, that's a good sign. And so I'm going to be honest, a lot of what I'm seeing, at least in terms of messaging from the top of the Taliban leadership, as I'm sure you would probably agree with it, it's heartening in its own way. I won't take them at their word for it. We've got to see what they actually do.
You shouldn't. Yeah.
And there are massive, reports of massive violence from the fighters in the street and killings, and I don't think it's worth we don't want to sweep any of that aside. It's good to focus on it. What they have said, what the leadership has said, is they're trying to basically assert control over the rank and file, people who are acting, they say, outside of their orders. But with I want to come back to Russia and Afghanistan, because with the United States withdrawing, really the only, I don't even know if it's a natural ally, but you have these major powers, Russia and China, of course. And then in terms of their immediate neighbors, it's really only Pakistan that a Taliban-run Afghanistan is going to be on some kind of good terms with. But But coming back to Russia, what relationship do you think the Taliban would like to have with Russia, and vice versa? Just getting it, in that dynamic, what do they each want from the other party? And that, of course, will inform what relationship ultimately results, what we actually see happening. What do you think there, Scott? Mark.
Yeah, thanks. I think that what Russia wants, definitely, and I think the Taliban actually want the same thing at this point, is stability. Russia is very concerned about instability spreading to its allies in the Collective Security Treaty Organization, particularly Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, and then eventually possibly into Russia itself. They would like a stable Afghanistan, something that hasn't existed for 40 plus years. They've been in some form of civil conflict or another. And they think that the regional powers, particularly through the prism of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which includes everyone in the region, even Afghanistan as an observer, and I think the Taliban may eventually be able to take that seat at the SCO, they have long used that organization between Russia and China and the Central Asian states, and recently India and Pakistan, to manage their differences and their respective interests in the region, in the hope of stability, of controlling terrorism, extremism, and separatism, the three evils, and fostering trade. Right? Security leads to trade, and trade is good. So that's what they would like to see with Afghanistan. And I think the Taliban are at the point, they realize that their biggest hurdle at this point is not even the still evacuating Americans. It's not resistance in the Panjshir Valley. Their biggest problem is financial, because now the U.S. is going to begin its economic stranglehold of the new Taliban government, with sanctions, with seizing Afghanistan's national reserves, with stopping IMF and World Bank and UN development aid, and everything that has kept the U.S.-backed client regime in Kabul in power for the last 20 years. They intend to stop all of that, which will be a huge economic and inevitably humanitarian crisis. They won't be able to pay salaries. Prices are already rising. The value of the currency is depreciating, and the food will very quickly become hard to acquire. And this is going to lead to a humanitarian situation on the ground, which could lead to new political instability, which could lead to new security instability, something that Russia and China don't want.
Right there. It's like the sanctions and everything else. If you put the country into these kind of quagmire, then it's almost predictable the chaos that's going to erupt from that quagmire. And, considering that the United States, we're not bordering Afghanistan. You have Russia, China.
We're getting out of Dodge.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We're getting out of Dodge, and we're leaving, this kind of fire there. And look, we were talking the other day about this, where the G7 countries, Europe in general, during the Syrian war, Europe is the one that took the hit, despite the fact that the U.S. was dropping billions into undermining the Bashar al-Assad's government. And so it's like you had all of these refugees flooding into Europe, destabilizing the countries of Europe. We weren't part of that.
There still isn't a Taliban government. There is an interim government at this point. And the various leaders of the Taliban are in negotiations with each other and with, other power figures, right? Karzai, Abdullah, various warlords, this resistance in the Panjshir Valley and others, about what a Taliban government will actually look like, because it's not announced yet, right? There is some ideas about some figures, defense minister and so on, but nothing has been formally announced. Everything is still in the interim government phase.
Okay, that makes sense. The intergovernmental phase, basically, they're trying to come up with a government. They haven't necessarily established one yet.
Yes.
But I guess my point is, and we can move on after this to another story. But I guess my point is, chaos in that country will only serve to undermine the other regional powers that are nearby, be it China,
yes, and
Russia.
That is in U.S. interest.
Right, and that's kind of where I was going with this. Like, it's this weird scenario where the chaos that is going to erupt potentially out of that country, out of financial, devastation. What, $6 billion that was supposed to belong to Afghanistan that we're basically holding on to? And that doesn't even touch what's in some of the other countries in Europe. And so, yeah, it's going to create a certain destabilization within the country itself that could be harmful to the people who are in the region. But I guess my point is, doesn't this create two things? Leverage, on one hand, in order to get the Taliban to kind of function within a particular mindset. But on top of that, It also incentivizes China, Russia, Iran, and the other countries in the region to basically make up the gap or make up the slack to prevent the country from...
Yes, it does. Yes, to engage and to try to get some type of aid to keep whatever possibly stabilizing force emerges, whether that's the Taliban, some type of inclusive government, whatever it is, in place. And there's a lot of political rhetoric directed internally in the U.S. calling the U.S. withdrawal a gift to Russia and China, that makes sense if you think of it as a gift in the cartoon Tom and Jerry sense of the word, where there's a little package that explodes as soon as you open it. That is the type of gift that has been left in Afghanistan by the U.S. withdrawing and immediately then attempting to destabilize whatever emerges behind them with an economic, stranglehold.
That is so unfortunate. Because I'm glad that we're leaving, but I don't want the country to fall into disrepute further to what it is. And the sanctions, especially in some of the other countries, have only served to create instability, not necessarily bolster the country. So, yeah.
But pictures of Marines holding little kids, right? We care.
There's that. There's that. The babies. We love the babies. Or women. The other one is women. We're there for 20 years to protect the women.
Yeah, to protect that. We invaded Afghanistan to put women's rights into Afghanistan. I mean, quite obviously.
Mark, I want to go to another story. This one is Pentagon is poised to unveil, demonstrate classified space weapon. The push to declassify an existing space weapon is being spearheaded by General John Hayden, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, it is unclear what this weapon is, but they're basically saying that they want the Department of Defense has been working to disclose it, to not just disclose it, but to actually do a test for the world to see, to basically put it up for the world to see. These are the capabilities of our new special access project that we are basically disclosing. And I made the point that basically every other country around the world hates this. Like, meaning they don't want to end up in this kind of space race of weaponry and whatnot. And this basically is going to force the other countries to follow suit. What has been I think I know the answer to this, but what has been the Russian perspective on this? And has there been any kind of word about responses or commentary against is the wrong word for it, but any words of commentary referencing this, the anti-satellite, anti-whatever weapon this is?
Okay, so this story is coming from sources to Breaking Defense, which is largely a web page, right. A glorified web page that reports on defense and security matters in the U.S. Not the New York Times, not the Washington Post, etc. What that tells me is that there are people in the Pentagon that want to go public about anti-satellite technology. One, as a validation of the new U.S. Space Force, and two, as deterrent value. Right? If you have like mutually assured destruction with weapons, with nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, if you don't announce that you have it, it's not a deterrent, right? But here's the thing. The weaponization of space is explicitly forbidden by the 1970s era Outer Space Treaty, which has been violated by every major power so many times that it's only in place because no one has officially dissolved it. Russia, China, and the United States, particularly the United States, but Russia and China as well, and to some extent European countries, have already demonstrated anti-satellite weapons, ground, sea, air-based, some combination of those. Every one of them. They already have them. They've demonstrated them, right? This is, something that a lot of people don't already stand. Now, the question is about actual anti-satellite weapons, ASAT weapons, in space, right, in lower orbit, or even in geosynchronous orbit, which is the valuable territory in space. And that has not been officially announced, although it is suspected that at least the U.S., Russia, and China already have it. I would not be surprised to see that that is already the case in the case of all three countries. The U.S. is going to, presumably, according to sources, or there are some people in the U.S. military who want to go public with this. And there is no indication of exactly what type of weapon that is, whether it's some type of RF jammer, electronic warfare, whether it's some type of a low or high-powered laser, whether it's some actual kinetic weapon, maybe the most unlikely, but some type of space-based anti-satellite weapon, which would, of course, force Russia and China to go public with their probable space-based anti-satellite weapons, in some respectable near future distance after that. And yes, that would cause more of a space race than already exists, because when things go public, they get driven by the media, which drives political response, which politicians demand more money be donated to fight the anti-satellite weapon gap, and so on.
So very simple. I would just want to step in to try to make sure I understand, but also to briefly recapitulate what it sounds like you just said. You're speculating that somebody inside the Pentagon associated with this program wants to get it out. They don't have the sources to get it out through the NYT or WAPO. Yeah. So they go to Breaking Defense, which is, pretty established. I think it's like the premier weapons blog style thing here in the States. They go to that. And the reason they're doing that is because they want to force Russia to show their hand so that they themselves can fundraise on it, basically. They can get more money apportioned in the next budget.
Yes.
And they can build up their program. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, if they go public, that will force other people to go public, right? And that will provide them with more weapons, more money to build more weapons. And the already existing quiet arms race will accelerate in both speed and amount of money that is driving it. Yes.
That is greatly unfortunate.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, beyond what else would be a reason to disclose? They've used this argument of, well, it's a deterrent. It's a deterrent. And the only way that it can be a deterrent is if people know that you have something to deter. Hence, the Special Access Project needs to be disclosed.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Mark. I think it's this is more of a boondoggle to basically increase the amount of money that is going to be spent on these various arms. There's also
the U.S. Space Forces would also like more money,
and
that would provide more money to them as well.
There's also this other angle.
As a new branch of the armed forces.
Well, there's also this other angle that I kind of want to hit for a moment. This one on weapons tech and the belief that because the U.S. is a manufacturing hub currently, that it is competing with China, and this notion that we have, let's say, an industrial base that can appropriate anything that needs to be done for these weapons in space to get this kind of lead in these weapons. Meaning the idea, or that China, being the horse out of the barn, is creating this kind of weird thing in the U.S. In regards to the way we've been operating. And if we want to have this kind of military dominance, then part of that is we can have the private sector building this stuff, assisting this stuff, and exploding in the way that we put this stuff out there in space for defense and everything else. Is there any there to that? Is there any idea or notion that the relationship between China and the United States, the competition, is basically driving this sort of disclosure?
Sure. I mean, there definitely is an arms race, and an arms race, in the public eye would drive things faster, right? And China and Russia both provide that public specter. It is actually just a really, it's an updated version of exactly what occurred during the Cold War, just now in space. And it's a militarized version of the space race, if you will, because there, of course, already was a space race. It just wasn't overtly military.
Yeah.
And the way the countries have generally gotten around the Outer Space Treaty, which also prevents the testing of weapons in space, is they test things that they can plausibly say are serving some other reason, but could also be used to knock satellites out of space.
Mark, thank you, man. I really appreciate this. Mark Sloboda is an international relations and security analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at MarkSloboda1, and you can find him on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back, and we're taking your calls. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Again, that's 202-521-1320. I'm going to take, we've got a slight moment right now. I'm going to take it. Happy birthday, Andre. Andre, engineer for the show normally. Of course, excellent engineer Saul, currently filling in while Andre is off this week. But it is Andre's birthday today. And so happy birthday,
Andre.
I'm not going to actually sing it, but you get my point.
He's
Happy
on
birthday,
vacation right
Andre.
now, but
Exactly.
happy birthday. He can hear it when he comes back.
He can.
Excellent.
It is a good thing.
Yeah. Mine is on the 31st. I'm going to be away from here. By the way, might as well give a reminder. Shane and I are going to be off next week. I'm going on vacation for about a week and a half. Shane is going to be gone for about 2 weeks. Week after next, I think the day or so after Labor Day, I will be back here. And so just a heads up, I'm going for my birthday trip and getting my wife so my wife's birthday was August the 2nd. It is her birthday and it's our anniversary, both on the same day. Initially, when we were traveling, we got married in Iceland. And I kind of made the point of like, well, hey, why don't we just go on the trip? And she's like, I'm not getting married on your birthday. I was like, well, what about getting married on your birthday? I'm okay with that. And I had no issue with that. So that's basically what ended up happening. But because of the way the trip kind of broke out, she's always wanted to go to Cappadocia. Cappadocia, Turkey with the balloons and everything else.
Like central Turkey.
Yeah.
You have their balloons, but there are also these caves, these underground cave systems that I've seen.
Even the hotels and everything else are like built underground and stuff like that.
Very cool.
She wanted to go. And so when we were traveling the first time around, I didn't get the opportunity to get her to, I think it wasn't Czech Republic, it was Prague. I didn't get the opportunity to get her to Prague. There was all sorts of issues that I had to manage and mitigate dealing with health and everything else. And so I didn't have the luxury of going any and everywhere that I wanted to go. So in this situation for Turkey, I was like, yes, this will be a great opportunity. And so for her birthday, I got her ticket in Cappadocia, location in Cappadocia, right where you can see balloons and everything else, and sitting with a hot tub with a window where she can see balloons.
That's awesome.
It better be that way. I mean, that's the picture anyway. Like you get there like, whoa, what the hell is this? But all things being equal, that's our trip. So we're going to hit Tbilisi, Georgia first, and then we're going to go to Cappadocia, Istanbul, and then come back home.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a region of the world super beautiful from what I hear.
Yeah.
And between like central Turkey and the Caucasus, Georgia up there, like intense variety of ecosystems.
That's
everything
what I keep hearing.
from deserts and mountains and hills and grasslands and forests, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah, it's supposed to be beautiful.
Yeah.
It's funny. I didn't even think about it. When we were in Switzerland, it was brought up. It's like, hey man, I think I really want to go somewhere else. And, after this, I feel great after this trip, et cetera. And it's like, hey, what about Georgia? Oh, what about Georgia? And then as I started looking into it, it was kind of everything. I was like, wow, that looks pretty great. It's right there beside Turkey. And I had even considered doing Nagorno-Karabakh, but Armenia and Azerbaijan,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
I'd even considered those two, but there wasn't enough time frame in order to make all of that work. So I just went with those two.
And there is a recently finished war there with skirmishing
And there's
still
that,
happening.
right.
And yeah,
there's that.
There's that.
I guess my thought was, since we've been covering it, it would be awesome.
Oh,
to see
totally.
It was kind of there.
And even
but you're right.
then, it would be a super wicked, awesome trip. It's just maybe not for your wife's birthday.
Exactly right.
That kind of thing.
That doesn't come across as a travel, as just a basic vacation.
No, it doesn't.
That comes as a little bit more of a work trip.
No, it doesn't.
But you're going to be going also. Now, you're going with your bro, right?
Yeah, my bro and I are flying out this Saturday. We're going to be gone for 2 weeks, flying back Saturday, 2 weeks later. And we're going to be biking around, hanging out with my family. I'm going to be, my family's divorced. Dad on one side, mom on the other side. That's the way it usually works.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother, actually, on my dad's side, hasn't ever met that side of the family. And so we're flying out together.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get to introduce him to my mom and my aunt and uncle, some of them at least. And we're going to bike from like the Portland area up to the Seattle area, kind of like across Washington State.
Yeah.
I want to bike around Olympic National Peninsula, or the Olympic National Park on the peninsula out there. It's beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
We've been there before, but never biked around.
How long would it take you to get from point A to point B?
To get from Portland up to Seattle, we're expecting about 4 days.
Okay.
Give or take.
Okay.
And that's pretty consistent riding.
Yeah.
Hard riding decently, but we've done that kind of thing before.
Are you going to have sleeping bags?
Oh yeah.
Tents, et cetera? Is it just going to?
Yeah. We're going. Yeah, we're doing our setup. I've gotten into it in the past. I won't get too deep into it, but yeah, a tent, specifically a tarp setup, sleeping bags, ground sheets, all that stuff, all your camping gear. We got collars though.
Very interesting.
And so I feel like we should go to them. We're taking more to 202-521-1320. Let's go to Michael calling in from Sydney, talking about Afghanistan and the space race. Michael, you're on. What's going on?
Yeah, well, I think something that should be remembered about Afghanistan and the space race is Russia, the enemy of America apparently, and apparently happy to see the Americans out of Afghanistan apparently. When the Taliban cut off the routes into into Afghanistan to resupply their bases, Russia actually offered and cooperated with America to put bases in Tajikistan so they could resupply their bases in Afghanistan. If it wasn't for the Russian cooperation and encouraging Tajikistan to do it, they wouldn't have done it. Because Tajikistan used to be part of the Soviet Union, as you know, and they're very close allies of Russia. So Russia actually allowed America to put bases in Tajikistan to resupply their bases in Afghanistan. And also, Kazakhstan, where the Vlachodrome is, for years, even during all this, Trump, all this Trump-Russiagate stuff, and Russia being the enemy in the media, running around land-basing Russia and carrying on, even during the Obama years and all the crap towards Russia, they have basically allowed America to use the Vlachodrome and their own rockets, the Soyuz rockets, to launch astronauts into space, and it basically kept the American space program alive the past 15 years, until basically Jeff Bezos came along and Elon Musk came along and they had to do it for the Americans because their government's so useless they can't do anything. So I think it's very important to remember that Russia played a key role in keeping the American occupation of Afghanistan actually going, in the hope they could stabilise the country. So don't think Russia is celebrating for 1 minute they left the country in chaos.
I don't think they're celebrating that they left the country in the chaos. But here's another thing. Early on, I can see the expectation and the hope for amity between our country and theirs, and then it's clear early 2010 specifically that's not going to happen. And I bet the attitude right now is the longer you guys stay there, the better in some sense, because you're wasting resources. You're keeping some measure of stability, even though you're losing ultimately. It's because we've made an adversary out of them. I'm pretty sure they were happy to let the status quo remain. Now we pull out and we leave chaos for them, And of course, what's so maddening about this whole thing is the absolute horrible inconsequentiality of it in some deeper sense. All these lives lost, and for what? I have no idea what the answer is. I guess the only hope here is maybe the Taliban, with a decade and a half out of power, a couple decades of power, they've learned their lesson or something like that. They modernize and we see something better from them. But there are better ways that could have happened. And so there's no justification.
Yeah. I mean, it's 40 years at this point. I mean, 20 years of war and then 20 years prior of pulling the Soviet Union into it. So, it's, you look back and you think, God, all of that money, all of those lives, and what did we get out of it? It's, even people who basically fought in that war at this point consider it a pointless war.
Yes.
And that's, nobody wants to feel that. The idea that you put your life on the line and you find out at the end of it that the people who sent you there for reasons that weren't necessarily in the best interest of you, that country, or your own country.
Yes.
And a lot of weapons contractors made buku bucks off of that, but not us.
Yeah.
So.
And on the space, just one thing, quick note on the space program, Elon Musk specifically, as far as I can tell, he's successfully revitalized on the American end space development. That's what a lot of what people know him for. But you're right that the Russians were the mainstay of this for decades there. I just, I don't think it needs to be either or. Sometimes sort of productive competition is a good thing. You know what I mean? As long as it doesn't turn into blowing satellites up and raining down debris on the rest of us.
Stuff out the sky.
Yeah.
So somebody on Twitter sent me this. This is Popular Mechanics. Government accidentally releases documents on psychoelectric weapons. Now, yes, this gets into the Havana stuff.
Havana
right?
syndrome.
Yeah, because look, anybody who's on my Twitter page, I've been talking about this and because it's always shocking to me that this became one of the things. I don't have an issue, I think, if there's a medium between the two where you could see it, but oftentimes they don't explain the medium.
They don't explain
so the person was putting this out in Popular Mechanics, basically saying, hey, look, they have been researching this stuff, however the stuff operates. So maybe.
Good to hear, I guess. It sounds like Mind Rays from the 50s or something. It sounds like the subject of, the golden age of science fiction, which we now treat as conspiracy theory.
Well, it
and maybe
came from a FOIA.
What did you say?
Freedom of Information Act.
Interesting. Well, we should come back to this then. Very interesting stuff. Let's close this hour out. We're going to be back in a minute with headlines and the last hour of this morning show. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the disunited states we call America, it is time now for the last hour this morning, one of the last 4 hours this week, of the most disruptive show, covering news, politics, and events with conversation and more from these United States and the increasingly divided surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together that surely means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
It says the documents don't appear to be official.
The documents don't appear to be official. That's what I was looking at. That's what I was saying. I
was like, I remember this article, but I don't remember reading the article, if that makes sense. Like, I remember this being one of the things like, whoa, the government is doing what?
Yes.
But yeah, right here, at the very, they wait to the very end of it. I suppose you can't write the article unless you put it at the very end. But it said the federal government has absolutely experimented with mind control in varieties of ways, but the documents do not appear to be official. So it's even weirder that they sent these documents to the guy in the first place.
Yeah.
Unless they were trying to give misinformation, which is possible.
Possible, but yeah, that's such a weird, if you can take the person, I don't know anything about it. I want to get into the headlines and, of course, our duties, but I also want to say, hope everybody's having a great morning. Thursday, August 26th, just past 9 a.m. Eastern, and it's Andre's birthday. Again, engineer for the show, off this week. I just want to say happy birthday, Andre. Hope you're doing well. And also, a quick reminder for folks, we're going to be off all of next week. Jamarl and I are each taking our own vacations. Then the week after Jamarl comes back, I'm still gone. And then the week after, we're all back and everything resumes, hopefully normally. But just a quick heads up, if you don't hear us next week, don't freak out. That's what's going on. Without further ado, though, let's get into COVID news. There are about 170,000 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. There were also 1,470 new deaths. Over the past week, there have been an average of about 152,000 cases per day. That's an increase of 23% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 52% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 61% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected 38,364,779 people across the United States. It has killed, meanwhile, 632,522 people. Florida is the only state in the U.S. where more people are dying of COVID now than at any other point in the pandemic. Last summer, they had their previous record of 185 deaths per day, but a few days ago, Florida's rate increased to 200 a day consistently and even hit 228 per day. Part of her first full day in office, New York Governor Kathy Hochul revealed 12,000 more New Yorkers that have died from COVID than were previously reported. This decree further divides the new governor from her predecessor and asks who is lying to play into their agenda more. This is a conversation we had earlier. Austin brought this up. She waited to release this information, and she's, of course, going to be competing with other contenders next year for re-election. She was not, after all, elected governor. But anyway, just an interesting conversation we had at about 8:10 earlier this morning. Go back and check it out if you're interested in that one. Mississippi has now quarantined about 15% of all K-12 public school students this month, either for positive COVID-19 cases or known exposures to COVID-positive patients. These 65,525 students who have been ordered to isolate include 11,766 who have tested positive. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has issued another executive order doubling down on his ban of vaccine mandates. The governor tested positive last week despite being fully vaccinated. Over in New Zealand, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has said she will stick with the strategy of a nationwide lockdown in order to fight a rising number of cases. This has become increasingly unpopular as the number of cases in a recent outbreak continue to rise. Ardern said that health experts had advised her to continue with the elimination approach. Vietnam is sending 2,000 soldiers to a manufacturing hub to help contain an outbreak there, which health officials say could see another 50,000 cases in the next 2 weeks. The province is the site of plants for many foreign manufacturers. In national news back here in the States, the first person in the kidnapping plot against Governor Gretchen Whitmer has been given 6 years in prison for his role in the crime. Ty Garbin is his name. He was the only one of the group to admit guilt, while his accomplices still try to win their case under entrapment. Garbin testified to many of the group's training practices, including a shoot house, quote-unquote, with a similar layout as Governor Whitmer's house, where they frequently raided to practice. Pretty morbid. Inmates in a Northwest Arkansas jail have been prescribed ivermectin to treat their coronavirus cases. The drug is an aggressive antiparasitic medication that has only been given approval as a head lice and parasitic worm treatment. Federal health officials even warned the state that ivermectin should not be used to treat COVID as it can cause serious harm. And again, the problem here is it hasn't been approved. We don't know that it works. Many believe it simply doesn't. And this hasn't been approved. They're basically using these people as guinea pigs. I still have my hopes for it, but this isn't the way to do that kind of thing. In international news, large numbers of people waiting to escape Taliban rule remain outside of the Kabul airport despite threats of an impending terror attack by ISIS. Britain's armed minister said the threat was quote-unquote severe. Sadly, it is also the case that evacuation flights may not be able to get everyone out in time. Pakistan's open border crossings are also seeing large crowds of people attempting to seek refuge in the neighboring state. Tigrayan authorities say an Ethiopian government blockade has left 1 million people on the brink of starvation. Abiy Ahmed's government has blamed the Tigrayan rebels. Tigrayan officials say the local health system has been crippled, a situation causing health problems and, of course, problems with COVID-19. And in business news, you've heard of Takis. You may have been obsessed with Flamin' Hot Cheetos, but apparently Flamin' Hot Mountain Dew is the next thing. It will be launching next week. Again, controversial, arguably incredibly distasteful, but hey, people are people. What can you do? Facebook has approached experts on forming an election committee within their company. The group will serve as an advisory board regarding global elections and related content. They will review political ads and combat misinformation. This seems to be Facebook's solution for resolving claims of bias, censorship, and misinformation. Or it's an international body run by a single U.S.-based company that is attaining power to control information involved in every election in the world, basically. That's my take. I want to come back on this. Those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I'm getting crazy eyes from Austin, which means either I'm getting something horribly wrong or everybody else is.
What?
No, just this idea. Basically, Facebook, of course, the most prominent and most impactful social media platform the world around. Although, some countries like Russia and China, where there are other more dominant social media platforms, but just take it as the international thing.
Oh, definitely for the West.
What'd you say?
For the West.
For the West,
definitely.
100%.
Yeah.
And I'm worried about an election committee that they're going to be formed for any given country that they're deciding to look at, that they're going to, use to decide basically who is a viable candidate, who's guilty of spreading misinformation, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Because if how they handled the 2020 election in the States is any sign of it, they're not going to do a good job.
Yeah.
They're going to suppress accurate information and they're going to spread lies. They're going to support people who spread lies.
I mean, think of what they did with Hunter Biden stuff. Like where it's like, okay, we don't want to put this out there. Twitter, same thing. We don't want to show this. We don't want to present this. And you find out, oh, right, that was actually correct. And I would suspect they didn't care whether it was correct or not. It was just disadvantageous to their candidate. I think it was that. That's the beginning and end of it. And so when you look at something like this, where these guys are basically going to start coming up with this kind of election thing, yeah, I have qualms. I mean, will it be in pursuit of their economic interests? Will it be in pursuit of their political interests, et cetera? And deeper question, should Facebook be doing this anyway if it's supposed to be a platform, as opposed to having this kind of editorial decision-making process? No, I mean, we keep giving these guys more, I don't know, power is not the right word for it, but it's almost like in lieu of laws not being there around how these things are supposed to operate, you get this kind of weird, bad outcomes of social media networks trying to decide on what's true. And I strongly suspect that what's true is going to run in line with their economic best interests.
Well, and the threat of legislation or some antitrust, action by the DOJ under the Biden administration or whatever, that's the thing. Austin, you say I'm a cynic, and maybe you're right. But
they did it already.
Every cynic has a romantic that just can't accept reality. I want this world to be a better place. I feel like Facebook should hold themselves to a higher standard. That's why I care, because of how horribly they bungled this thing. I don't want to, you can come in and talk about this if you want to. No pressure, Austin. But
yeah, I don't trust, they've already shown how they operate to me. So that's the way I take it.
He's coming in. We got him. Yeah. Austin Pelly is on the way in. Another one of these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, they've already shown themselves to me. But Austin is going to make the case for Facebook, I suppose.
For why Facebook is not, well, I'll just let him get into it. Again,
I'm going to make the case for big tech.
What's that?
I'm going to make the case for big tech.
Fair enough.
Any good right-winger Republican would do that.
Really?
No, I'm just surprised that you normally like to play devil's advocate, so I'm surprised you didn't see the other side on this. I read it initially and I obviously can't tell what they're genuinely trying to do here, but I saw it as like, okay, a lot of people are very mad at us for the last election here. So what can we do right now? They just have this massive platform where information gets spread. That's not going to go anywhere. That's not going to change. So what can they do? Outsource that power, give a committee, get people from multiple sides, and then the people can decide on their own, like what information they keep up and whatnot.
But it's not really people deciding. It's Facebook. It's still the end-all, be-all in regards to it. And first point, you're right. That is exactly how it started, where with Donald Trump being elected, if you remember, there was this huge uproar over the information that was being, what was it?
Fake news?
No, not fake news. It was, what was the thing? These guys were working behind the scenes. It was like with the Trump administration, and they were getting all of this information on the various people.
Cambridge Analytica.
Yeah, that.
Yes.
Like, so it was that part. Then you also had this other part where, when Donald Trump won, people freaked out. Congress freaked out. Oh, all of this information, all of this other stuff. That created weirdness when you got to Hunter Biden and the 2020 election, because you had media organizations and social media deciding that they're not going to show certain things because of it being disadvantageous to the Democratic Party or the Democratic candidate, in this case, Joe Biden. And then you had the other thing where they silenced Trump, and they was like, okay, well, we're sending this decision out. So it's like in one decision after the next, they don't necessarily, they put in this weird box of, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Well, that's the way that they've been running. This is their attempt to say, okay, let's try something else.
Yeah.
Because now essentially they are the one big power. They are the tyranny.
Well,
and now they're introducing an aristocracy.
There's also another problem, platform versus publisher. And I think that's, our politics have put social media into a very weird box of this notion of platform versus publisher. And oftentimes these guys are acting like publishers. They're not acting like platforms. And so, I don't know. I don't have, I don't have this huge feeling for this, that this is going to work out in the way that it is being discussed, especially since they were concealing information prior. And let's be honest, a lot of the stuff that's on Facebook is disinformation in general. And so it's like,
because it's a public domain.
It's a public domain, right? It's a social platform. So I don't know. This doesn't thrill me per se. I don't necessarily think these.
I will get into the fact here, which is, let's talk about the previous, when they did this previously. Trump got banned on Facebook, off of Facebook and Twitter, et cetera, at least suspended. Technically on Instagram, you can still see his account, but he's not allowed to post anything new. So he can't post anything to him. Let me revise that. Point is, he was prevented from doing that. Then they formed an independent committee to review not just that case, but every other case. Now, if you look into the details of how that committee worked, here's how it worked. They created an initial batch of people. So they created the sort of seed pool. They chose the seed pool. And now that seed pool, or the people who are on this committee, will elect in the future their own people. So going forward, they're going to struggle for independence. But those people were chosen by Facebook.
Yeah.
From the get-go. They were able to sort of set it up. It's like if I have that power, that's suddenly a lot of power. I can choose, okay, do I want, on my peace committee, do I want somebody from Northrop Grumman or some random activist? Whoever I choose is going to radically change the future of that thing. And I would argue they made bad decisions on Trump. They made bad decisions on this. They made bad decisions on so many things. That's with the idea of the committee specifically. But there's also this general case. Just practically, and I don't have anything personally against Mark Zuckerberg. A little bit robotic, but so are so many of us. So am I. Look at my facial expressions sometime. Mark Zuckerberg is left with two choices, basically. Do I go with the Republicans or do I go with the Democrats? And either way, he's screwed. Our political system is pushing them into this trap. They can't do anything with it. But over time, the trend has very consistently been more suppression of information, more suppression of media. It's like the weight of it all. I can't help but be cynical because that's what has always happened with these things. The inevitable trend of these companies, these social media companies, not because they're bad people, just because of the pressure they're getting, arguably, is to continue to suppress information and to control elections and all that stuff.
Well, I'm not saying that, you brought up a lot there. I'm not saying that the system's perfect. I think that this is their way of so far fixing it. I mean, maybe you go into users can elect who's on the committee. Maybe you experiment with something like that. That way you are really representing everyone. That way it's not just big Facebook electing this committee that then just goes on and elect their predecessor, and then you get stuck in this rut of following the agenda of the massive company. I don't think it's perfect, but it was broken before. So anything that we can fix, I say, is worth a try. And then you were saying that, sorry, it's slipping my mind right now, that about the platform. And, oh yeah, I think that Facebook and social media in general tried to be ethical, right? If you don't worry about ethics, you don't have the problem because you're detached from the problem because you're just the platform.
No,
and then
they
you
have a
can
problem
blame
either way.
I'm sorry?
They have that problem either way. I mean, like Shane said, the pressure that Congress was putting on him after Trump got elected, they dragged these guys before Congress and was basically browbeating them, telling them they need to conceal more data, hold more information hostage, et
Right,
cetera.
but when social media was first out, Facebook was first out, it was just we are just the platform and the users are the users. So anything that you say is attributed to you.
Yeah.
And now it's anything that you allow said on Facebook is attributed to Facebook as well as the user, but you get hit more if you're Facebook than the person that publishes.
Yeah, it's a weird box. Yeah, agreed.
But now that they have to play ethics, whose ethics do you take?
Exactly.
Quick thing here, by the way. Normally we have a guest on at 9:15. Today a guest is going to be joining us from 9:30 to 10, which means we're now entering into the period where we can start taking calls. 202-521-1320, whether we go to a break now or not. We can take calls on the other side of this one.
Yeah, we can take calls now.
Let's do it. Again, if anybody wants to join this conversation, it's an interesting one.
Look, the platform thing, we've left companies in this weird box of platform versus publisher, which means that they have to make a choice somewhere. Okay, what choice are you going to make? And is it possible to kind of make those choices and not be, what's the word I'm looking for, and be a platform? And on some level, it gets kind of dicey. Because at some point, a choice needs to be made on whether or not something is okay or not, whether you're going to consider something to be misinformation or not, whether you're going to consider something harmful, even if it's not misinformation, if that makes sense. Like, all of these choices and decisions are being made, and the companies themselves are being stuck in a box of having to make them. And so Facebook's thing is, how can we push ourselves away from this? How can we diffuse us getting hit on the various items and the various questions that come up? So their thought is, we're going to create a body that is quasi-independent and have that body to be taking the flak and to make the decisions on it, almost like a judiciary within Facebook in a weird way.
Like laundering their influence.
Yeah, that type of thing. The catch, though, is this is an issue of Congress more than anything else. I mean, what does it mean to be a platform? What does it mean to be free speech? Should the extensions of the First Amendment be extended out in some particular way for these various media organizations or these social media platforms in order to remove that difficulty from them? Like, there's a lot of that stuff that comes into play on this. It just seems like it's so imperfect that we end up in these kind of imperfect outcomes. That's my thought.
I think that's what makes it not the role of the government to do, because then you are really engaging with censorship. If it's for the sake of misinformation, and very much how subjective everything like that is, subjective. Then it's just going to be one party versus another fighting each other on misinformation. Then we just censor whatever we want.
Yeah, but
whoever's in party at the time.
You have private interests who either have financial or some kind of social,
ideological,
point of view that ends up doing it anyway. It's not like the people who are running this stuff. And with the economic bonus to it, meaning it's also in our economic interest to do X or Y, it's in our political interest to do X. Yeah, that stuff gets a little dicey. I would rather have laws around it.
Here's another thing, too. Like sleeping giants. I think, Jamarl, we've talked about this before. You ever heard of sleeping giants, Austin?
I have not.
This is this activist movement back in the day, started early Trump administration, where basically they would identify right-wing ads on YouTube, ads put up by right-wing organizations, and they would they would identify right-wing videos on YouTube, and they would watch them. And if those videos were monetized, if they had advertisements playing, they would contact the advertisers, tell them their ads were being played next to right-wing ads, and basically try to get them to, exactly not do that, so that their advertisements are basically only on non-right-wing videos. So there was this push, and this was fairly successful, and it's characteristic of the kind of thing where you have independent activist groups who are pushing companies, both the advertisers and de facto the social media companies, to cut off content. It's like, is that the company's fault? Is that the government's fault? Probably neither. It's this independent activist group's fault. And then the company, which is a for-profit company, is following suit. I don't know how you deal with that,
Well, it's just a private group trying to silence the opposition, which
exactly.
I'm
and
never
successfully.
in favor of. But I know you want to go to callers here.
Yeah, we got callers, exactly. Let's go to Brave, calling in from Atlanta. Brave, good to hear from you. What's on your mind this morning?
Hey, good morning, guys. On the Facebook conversation you guys are having, I think this. Obviously, it's a horrible thing, but when you look at what's at the core, first of all, I don't think anyone should trust Facebook at all to go in any direction near that, right?
Agreed.
When you look at what's at its core, you have Trump gets elected. right? And then the establishment or the powers that be, let's just say the powers that be, because it's not enough to say establishment, right? The powers that be freak out because a decision was made, I guess, that they didn't agree with. And so then pressure is put on to the social media platforms to better control the flow of information, what we see and what we don't see, and it all has to agree with what the controlling faction say is acceptable. To me, what's really being said is, you stupid poors don't know what's good for y'all, and you guys have elected this guy, and we didn't want him in power. So at its core, what we have is the powers that be saying they don't trust the American people to decide for themselves. Now, it's a funny argument in itself because they already don't trust the American people, which is why you get all these little crazy things with the voter rules and no third party power and all this stuff, right? But at its core, what we're talking about is an argument of the powers that be not trusting or not willing to allow the people to make their own decision as to who they want to follow. Because whether it's Trump or a peanut butter sandwich, it doesn't matter. If that's the person who got the votes, then that's the person who got the votes. And it doesn't matter. And if those votes were casted based on information that someone decides to subscribe to, that's that person's choice. So it doesn't matter if the information came from, obviously there's some moral conversations that can be had around it, but still, if I watch CNN all day and I think that that Biden is the wave of the future, right? I may be misinformed as far as independent media and those arguments being made, but still, that's a decision that I decide to come to based on the media that I decide to watch and trust.
Yeah,
it's my choice. You see what I'm saying?
And keep in mind, to bolster your point, the Hunter Biden stuff. If you remember, the Hillary Clinton email leaks was the thing that people were freaking out about. It was like, oh man, she lost because of the emails. It's like, yeah, but those emails were true. It was things that she was putting out. It was like the WikiLeaks and everything else. And so this time around, you had Trump run against Biden, and then you get, what is the October surprise or the November surprise, whatever they call it. And you have all of this information come out about Hunter Biden and the laptop. And the first thing that they did was suppress the information across social media, even though it was true. The issue is we know better than you, and we don't want you to use this as a justification to not elect Joe Biden. That is horrendous. That is horrendous. Yeah, I don't trust it either, Brave.
And it's scary because the truth of the matter is that it's not about misinformation. It's about do what we say, do what we want, and participate in the way that we want you to participate. And if you're not doing that, then you are a problem. And that idea can also be applied to the wars. That idea can also be applied to how we are dealing with COVID, the response to COVID, the arguments that we are having over ivermectin and hydrochloroquine. I heard you guys earlier. It's insane where they have us. And the conversation that we had actually I think it was like last week or a couple of days ago, where we were talking about the whole thing with the pullout and how all this information is being poured out. People don't know which way to go, which direction. And I brought up the disambiguity rising. It also applies. Also, there's this thing called mass formation. If you guys want to check that out, just research on it, and then we could maybe talk about, or you could talk about it later at a different date. But it applies because what you have is the purpose is to spread so much mass confusion of which is just a overabundance of information, right? That the people can no longer decide which is right, which is wrong, and then mass formation comes in play when we start picking out dividing lines. And then we subscribe to certain beliefs as if it's a religion, and then we can no longer allow the conversation had by the other side. And that's where we find ourselves. Like,
yes.
It doesn't matter if, it doesn't matter if hydroxychloroquine or whatever.
Hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. Well, I agree with you, and it's worth maybe bringing up Edward Bernays and the influence of the early 20th century's advertising movement. Edward Bernays, nephew of Sigmund Freud, author of the books Crystallizing Public Opinion and Propaganda, really influential social theorist in the United States who influenced the advertising industry, but you can see his influence on our politics too. I mean, Chomsky said it, I think, best. This is the quote that I constantly go back to. The cudgel is to the totalitarian state what propaganda is to a democracy. Basically, propaganda, media, effectively, controlled media, is the weapon that any oligarchy can use. Does that always happen? No. Has it gotten worse over time? Almost certainly. And that's what I'm worried about. We have more callers, though, and I think we should go to them. Brave, thank you for the call. Let's go now to Malik. calling in from D.C. Malik, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call. I think Brave made some great points as to where we are as a society. I've called in on your show and I've also called in on By Any Means Necessary, largely making the point that that we find ourselves in a place where there isn't much debate, and it doesn't just come from the power structure. It also comes from political activists and political organizers as well, where we're kind of adhering to a very tight and very narrow ideological spectrum, and to me, to be quite honest, I think some of it has become very cult-like, and I think a lot of people believe that the left is leaning towards agreeing with largely authoritarianism, and to touch on the whole issue of ivermectin. I have personal experience with ivermectin and other antiparasitic drugs, or I think they call them antiemetics. People don't understand this. In the American medical community, antiparasitic drugs are very rarely prescribed. And in fact, doctors have been caught intentionally not prescribing antiparasitic drugs. And so from my perspective, and this is a very big thing that's never spoken of. There are a lot of illnesses in America and throughout the world, and folks will probably tell you, physicians will probably tell you in the third world, where drugs like ivermectin, and other antiparasitic drugs are kind of given freely because it's kind of understood that parasites are the underlying cause of a lot of illnesses. And so I'll say specifically about ivermectin, man, the side effects of ivermectin, much more harmless than the side effects that are being reported about the vaccine. And just to touch on Facebook, I'm in Facebook jail right now, man. I've been banned by Facebook so many times since COVID has started. Right now I'm not allowed to use certain functions on Facebook for posting not my own personal medical advice, but posting doctors who disagree with the current narrative.
And I don't like that. I don't know what specifically they're saying, and probably some of them are wrong, but whatever. That's just the case with people. I don't like that people are being suppressed. It's, again, you can see it. What is this whole push? I mean, it ties into the conversation, of course, we were just having about social media. I don't doubt that the medical administrators who are suppressing this stuff, many of them are doing it out of, entirely good intentions, because they want the facts as they see them to get out there, and they see a lot of things, a lot of lies being spread. But they don't know, and we should have a certain level of humility, especially the experts among us, especially the scientists whose entire profession and body of work is built on understanding that you have to be uncertain. You have to question your own beliefs. It's disgusting, and we've talked about this before, but the perversion of science for political purposes is ultimately the destruction of science, in my opinion. Anyway, we got other callers.
It's like it's like when you have a scientist or a community that does an analysis, or they do research, right? And they come up with their hypothesis and they have their result. And they say, okay, now you can have other scientists test this. You can have peer review and all that.
Falsifiability.
Only if it's these three. You can only have these three peers review it. Can't have anyone else do it. It's not free reign. It's because this is essentially what they're doing. Well, it's so that way you can only hear information that resounds my result that I came to.
No, I don't think it's that. I mean, ultimately,
you get down one side.
No, you get a situation where somebody does an experiment. Somebody else can do the experiment. Is it going to be peer reviewed? Yes. Should it be peer reviewed? Yes. And should you have other people who know what they're doing in order to go through it and be able to replicate the results and everything else? Yes.
That last one's the most important part.
Yes. And so, this notion that any Tom, Dick, and Harry comes out and with I'm probably not going to pay attention to it at all.
So let me tweak it. They can review it.
Just to be clear, though, I have no issue with scientists who've done experiments, lab work, and everything else coming to a conclusion and say, this is bogus. That's why I come down on ivermectin. That's why I come that way with hydrochloroquine. I don't care from the standpoint of, whether this works or not. What I care about is I said it backwards. I only care whether it works or not. if hydrochloroquine came back and it was like, hey, this actually does do it, I'd be like, yeah, great. Or if ivermectin, if they, if the double-blind studies that have been taking place, and if the other study that found out to be bogus, and if all of that stuff turns out that somewhere along the way they found some kind of effect that did, fair enough. I have no feelings about it. I do have feelings about people putting out misinformation about stuff because they get into their heads and they're out there taking goat meds or horse meds.
So that's not good. Clearly, that's not good. But why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? Maybe because they're stupid, some of them, and also probably because they feel like they've been lied to. They can't trust the establishment. This hasn't been approved. They can see it hasn't been tested. They're buying into theories. I don't know. I'm not saying it's not their fault, because certainly they're people. They should make wiser decisions than taking large doses of drugs that they, that's the kind of thing that you should look into before you do. But on the other hand, we've suppressed this stuff so effectively. And here's the thing with peer review. Peer review is not fundamental to science. Peer review is a completely new phenomenon in the history of science. You want your peers to look at your work, but there shouldn't be a caste system where your friends and your allies and the people who are already in power approve your work as the vetting process for establishing what's true and what's not. That's not science.
No, that's not my standard.
That's a hierarchy. That's an oligarchy.
That's not my standard.
It's once they have a review and say it goes against the popular narrative, then you're in the fringe. And that's when they silence it. So that's what I'm tweaking about mine. It's like they open it up to peer review, and you can come to whatever conclusion you want.
Yeah.
But if you don't come to their conclusion, then you're in the minority and you get pushed to the side.
Again, it depends on what it is. I mean, there's some things where they can show a connection to. There's some things that it can say. For example, you might have people out there with the flat earth stuff, and they'd be like, yeah, man, the scientists are totally just trying to suppress our information on the flat earth. That, the curvature of the earth and everything like that, they're just putting out this bogus information and whatnot. Yeah, you have some people who are just, off on that stuff. You have other people, and I have nothing wrong or see no issue with peer review. I just think it's necessary. I think it's vital.
I don't think it's necessary.
I don't think it's, well, we have a disagreement then. I do think from the standpoint that it shouldn't be, they can be competing narratives and they can be competing experiments, because that's the whole falsifiability thing. And you do get these things where you get anomalous results at times. That new, the thing that just came out recently, where they was like, we have this new force of energy, or this new energy, or this new particle and stuff like that. And as you're looking into the research, it's like, okay, that could be an anomaly that these guys are screaming about, that there's something new for various reasons.
I'm not saying this, I wasn't meaning this in science field. I was drawing an analogy to what social media is doing.
Yeah. No, I feel you. I'm just saying.
And trying to put out information or posts like, I believe Brave was saying that he was trying to do.
Well, and that's disgusting. That shouldn't be happening, to be clear. But also, I mean, peer review is new, man. And if you look at the sciences, like the hard sciences, math, physics, biology, the further away you get from the hard sciences, the more and more peer review you get, which is the thing. In a science, you don't need your peers to approve your work. Otherwise, you get you head Galileo. That's effectively, you have a status quo. You have an old paradigm. They suppress all threats to that paradigm. What you want is experiment, which doesn't rely on anybody believing you or disbelieving you or whatever. They do it for themselves and they see whether or not it works.
Experiment needs peer reviews.
No, it doesn't.
Yes, it does.
No, it
How
doesn't.
else would you know the experiment is legit? You realize that the entire point of the falsifiability
That's not what peer review is. Peer review is not perception.
Peer review is having people around you to review your work.
We'll come back to this.
What are you talking about? Shane, if somebody does an experiment, you have other additional experiments that other people do behind to ensure that the experiment was a success. Your experiment could have a flaw. It could be something that's screwed up. It might not be able to be replicated.
What you're describing is not peer review. If you look up Wikipedia, Jamarl, I want to get a scientist and an academic on this to talk about it, but we got a guest on. Let's go to her. We're going into our break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming back, we'll be joined by Lauren Steiner, grassroots activist and organizer. Back on the other side of this short break.
Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. By any means necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
to the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We have been, in fact, it's a few stories actually that we can hit on this one. But let's start with the budget reconciliation package. I think that's the one that's probably the one that's on the marquee, and we can move over to the California elections and everything else. But right now, $3.5 trillion in the budget reconciliation package is going into the Senate. And the catch is, will that be able to pass? Now, there's also this other bipartisan legislation that was supposed to be an infrastructure plan that is also moving through. But there's been this kind of inter-party fighting going on between where lefties have basically said it's either all or nothing, meaning if you don't pass the reconciliation, then the bipartisan bill is not going to pass. And there's questions on whether or not they were going to be able to stick to their guns on this, and it seems so far like they are. The question is what happens in the Senate. Joining us to have a conversation about it, she's a great friend of the show. I've known her for a while, Lauren Steiner. Lauren Steiner is a grassroots activist and organizer who fights the privatization of public institutions and public good. She was involved, or very involved, with Occupy LA, started and ran Los Angeles for Bernie Sanders, and was a delegate forum at the Democratic National Convention. She also hosts twice-weekly live show, The Robust Opposition, Sunday and Wednesday night at 7 p.m. on her personal Facebook page. It covers local, state, national issues featuring interviews, activists, organizers, independent journalists, elected officials, and progressive candidates. Lauren, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on again, guys.
Absolutely. I always enjoy when you come on. It's always good conversations. I want to get to the budget reconciliation package and this kind of intra-party fighting that is taking place between Democrats. And you can call them, more to the left, and you can call them more corporate Democrats. And it seems that the left is trying to grow a backbone, meaning members of the squad and stuff like that, who basically said, if the reconciliation doesn't pass with the items that are in that reconciliation, then neither is a bipartisan. It's a package deal, all or nothing. What is going on here between these groups?
Well, before I get to that, I want to just make one comment on your previous discussion, because I agree with both of you, Jamarl. I definitely think that peer review is important. But I agree with Shane that the process has become politicized. But what's become politicized is the publication process. These have to be peer-reviewed and published in a credible journal. And I think it's more the people that sit on the editorial boards of the credible journal that politicize it more than the peers that do the reviewing. So that said, to get on to the reconciliation process, what happened was you had this group of 9 that got joined by someone at the end, so it became a group of 10 of the moderates that were backed by the Third Way, which is a centrist organization, and the Chamber of Commerce, which we know is a total corporatist organization, basically trying to get this infrastructure bill passed on its own, because the infrastructure bill has been totally corrupted to be public-private partnerships, which is a neoliberal construct whereby instead of the government doing the public good or service, which you talked about in my intro, they farm it out to private corporations. And when they do that, what inevitably happens is the public good gets stinted, whether it's health care or housing or education or even war. They've privatized a lot of the war machine to the fact where they take all the money for their profits and their CEO salaries, and the public good gets less. So that's why progressives are kind of opposed to what happened to the infrastructure bill, while fully acknowledging that we need big investment in our infrastructure in this country. So the other thing that happened with that bill is they took away all of what is being called social infrastructure. And so that's how they whittled that down to $550 billion. And so what Bernie Sanders, as chairman of the Budget Committee, was doing was getting all that social infrastructure into this reconciliation bill, which has to be passed, which can be passed with only 51 votes, the 50 Democrats and Kamala Harris breaking the tie. Because it has a monetary implication, they do not need 60 votes. And the parliamentarian basically said they could get, I think, 2 bills passed every year by reconciliation. So all the good stuff that progressives want, such as Medicare expansion, having Medicare negotiate with Big Pharma on drug pricing, paid family and medical leave, pre-K.
$300, expanding it beyond the, December, I believe?
I think until 2025. All that stuff is in there. And originally, Bernie, this is, what's so great about him. He acted like he wanted $6 trillion so that they could do what they always have to do to save face, which is whittle it down. And they whittled it down to $3.5 trillion. But everything that he wants is still in there. It just has earlier expiration dates. But the thinking is that nobody is going to discontinue a program. Once you give people a benefit, it's very difficult to take it away. So that is the big victory. And, of course, the progressives, Pramila Jayapal's Progressive Caucus and members of the Squad were saying that they were not going to vote for this infrastructure bill until the reconciliation bill was passed.
Because they think that the corporate Democrats basically want to get the bipartisan bill while killing the reconciliation. They don't trust them.
Yes. And so that's what Pelosi did. And you have to give her, credit, because Gottheimer and the other 9 centrists were basically threatening to hold up their votes. But as Ryan Grimm was reporting, he didn't really have those people. They were kind of falling by the wayside. But on Monday night, they did manage to get what they perceive as a concession out of Pelosi, and what the Third Way in an interview and the chamber were presenting as a victory, which is they think that they've decoupled the infrastructure bill from the reconciliation bill, because Pelosi promised them that there would be a vote on the infrastructure bill by the 27th. And so I asked Ryan Grimm and also Dave Dayen, who are my go-to guys on these kind of issues, if they thought that the Senate could get together a reconciliation bill by the 27th. Dave Dayen thinks they can. Ryan Grimm thinks they can't, but both of them agree that there's wiggle room in this deadline, that Pelosi can get out of it if she needs to. And the last word from AOC and the Squad is that they're going to stand strong. No reconciliation bill, no infrastructure bill.
What about the Senate? Is this going to be able to pass the Senate? I mean, to me, that was the biggest hurdle. I mean, the House, they had the people in the House, but you get Semina, you get Manchin. How are they going to get that past the Senate, considering they need each and every person plus the tiebreaker vote from Kamala Harris?
Well, I think it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that Sinema and Manchin are going to vote for it. They're not going to sabotage Biden's agenda at the last minute. What they're going to demand is some cuts, and so it probably is not going to be $3.5 trillion at the end of the day, but they're going to go ahead and vote for it.
This is part of a whole process, though, of holding bills up and holding, things that everybody would agree on. And Republicans are guilty of it, too, although because Democrats have been in power, they're arguably, in a weird way, more guilty of it, especially with these internal divisions. Holding up bills that basically everybody would want, but because they're pushing for, a specific wedge, because they're pushing for their platform, nothing gets done. That seems to be the status quo, because it's what's going to happen, right? We're going to be held on this threshold, and effectively the Senate's not going to vote for it because they don't have the votes, unless I'm misunderstanding you, Lauren.
No, the Senate is going to vote for that, because Here's the thing. Pelosi, you have to give her credit. You know, I can't stand how centrist she's become. But when you do look back at her history, you do see her being a huge advocate for Medicare for all. And what happens is the more you're in that institution, the more you realize that you simply have to compromise. I mean, this is what I've come to, and it's really affected me in the last year. And I would have to say that YouTubers like Jimmy Dore have really driven me towards this position.
Same here.
An activist. And I remember saying this in 2013 when I fought this bad fracking bill. When I had this 20,000 signatures on a petition, I delivered it to the legislator, and at her office, I said, you know, some people have said politics is the art of the possible, and that was Otto von Bismarck, Prussian Juncker. But I like to follow someone else who said, some people see things as they are and ask why. I see things as they could be and ask why not, which, of course, was RFK. So I have changed about that. As an activist, the two sentences that were like fingernails on a blackboard to me were politics is the art of the possible and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Same here.
But as I've seen these so-called lefty YouTubers and podcasters with their purity tests, it's made me so angry that what I realize is that those two sayings are actually true.
Yes.
That when you're in an institution of 435 people in the House and 100 people in the Senate, you have to compromise. Yeah. And the thing is that what they're not understanding is these gains that are going to be gotten in the infrastructure bill, the reconciliation bill, make a material difference in the lives of millions, tens of millions of Americans. So they're actually coming from the privileged position when they poo-poo this.
It is obscenely privileged. I mean, like just take one provision, the expansion of Medicare, for example. No, it's not Medicare for all. And you would have some of these people on YouTube or whatever, be like, oh, well, that's not Medicare for all. And you guys are backing the Democratic Party. And you make the point of like, yeah, but that's going to affect 40 million people. That is not insignificant. Even if it's not Medicare for all, it's not insignificant. And as somebody who's, dealt with Medicare going all the way back to like 17 years old, there are huge gaps in Medicare coverage, eyeglasses, dental care. And most people, believe it or not, especially people of color, just go without. They just don't get it at all. And so you have people losing teeth and all of this stuff. And so to expand that to 40-something million people is dramatic in regards to the effect it's going to have on the population. And then add to that lowering the age, the $300 child care. All of those things would have been dramatic in me growing up in this country. Even the college thing, where you get 2 free years of college. All of those things basically lower the amount of money that is coming out of people's pockets, and in many cases, physically, tangibly puts money in their pockets. And you have this element, weirdos on the left basically saying, poo-poo that. It's insane. Yeah, Lauren, I think we've kind of hit a similar arc on this. I've been driven to this position, if in anything else, kind of like there is sane and there is insane, and what is the reality of events?
But isn't this a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation? Like, isn't that a catch-22? Because by pushing, you're effectively pushing for some, to not be as bellicose and one-sided, polarized as a lot of the, I don't even know what to call fringe progressives or something like this.
I don't know what to call them.
Real anti-establishment progressives.
It just gets very weird though. Like, because initially, I was in that mindset too of like,
I had a point.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It was just that doesn't work. What they're doing doesn't work. But simultaneously, isn't the entire history of living memory of internal left-wing politics, the most left-wing parts of the party? Yeah. Reconciling themselves, compromising, ultimately giving into the establishment. So that doesn't work, right?
Yes.
Well, it has worked because you can't say it's the establishment. Any change that we've had may not be as much change as we want, but it's better. It's always better than what it was. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Incrementalism. And people are still arguing with me on Twitter and saying, well, I'll believe it when I see the bill.
Yeah.
Like, you know what? How about you go out and push for it? Can you imagine if the students of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, said, I'll believe that LBJ will sign the voting rights bill when he signs it? No, they were out there. That's what Chris Hedges says. You need a movement. You need a movement to push these politicians. And what Ryan Grim was saying on Twitter was it's really amazing how nobody is out there pushing these politicians on this thing, which is arguably going to be the biggest social program since the Great Society and since the New Deal.
Yeah.
Nobody's pushing it. There was one rally that Our Revolution in New Jersey did outside of Josh Gottheimer's office. He was the leader of the centrist bloc. But aside from that, everybody's just sitting there, keyboard warriors, being cynical. And that's the worst thing that I think these YouTubers do, their purity test, is they make everybody cynical nihilists.
Well, they profit from the nihilism. I mean, and all, like there's no audience to say, hey, that's a great bill. Or great bill, that's too strong. But there's no audience to basically say, hey, actually, I like the $300 a month. Or I like the child care, or I like the Medicare. There's no audience for that.
But shouldn't you always keep pushing? I'm playing devil's advocate here.
No.
But shouldn't you always be dissatisfied? I can understand what you're coming from, but I know that there's an unrepresented voice that I want to include in this conversation, which is people who we're talking about here. Shouldn't you always be pushing? Shouldn't you never accept what they give you? Because frankly, it's not enough. It might be better than what you had, sure, but are we just going to lie down in the mud, metaphorically speaking?
But do you also have to be honest and reconcile 40 million people is not insignificant? It's that.
Do both. I mean, we're here, the Medicare for All Coalition in North Carolina, where I now live, okay? They don't have, in North Carolina, they're one of the Republican states that haven't taken the Medicaid expansion money, even though 90% of it's going to be funded by the federal government, just because they're Republicans and they're jerks. And that would put 680,000 people, would give them health care that they have rejected. So the Medicare for All Coalition that I'm in was saying, they want us to sign on to this letter, this other group that's pushing for this. Should we sign on? We've always taken the position that we're not settling for anything less than Medicare for all. And after much discussion, it was decided that, yes, we're going to sign on, because the whole point of Medicare for all is to provide people health care. So if Medicaid expansion can get 680,000 people health care, then why wouldn't we sign on?
Yeah.
You have to look at, here's the thing, and I learned this from reading this book, Getting to Yes, The Art of Negotiation, and I read it like 40 years ago, and it's all about, you look at your positions, but under the positions is an underlying interest. If you stick to your position, if the two sides stick to their position, you're never going to have agreement. So what you're trying to find is that if there's some underlying interest under both of your positions that can be satisfied. So that's what we're talking about here. Let's not forget that Medicare for All is about providing people with health care. And we should not be poo-pooing, as Jamarl says, something that's going to provide health care to, tens more millions of people. And that's my position on it. Now, of course, the newest thing they're saying is, oh, well, this is all performative. They're going to cave at the last minute. Nancy Pelosi's always been a corporatist. But Ryan Grimm made a great point on my show about Afghanistan last week, because the last question I asked him was about this. I said, do you think she's ultimately going to do this? And he said, yes, she wants this to be her legacy. ACA is a flawed legacy. But if she can go out and say that she cut child poverty in half, which is what this $300 per child credit would do, has done. If she can say that she did that, that's a legacy. And what they don't understand is she has more money than God. She doesn't need to please any more corporatists. At this point in her life, in her 80s, she's looking for her legacy. And the thing is that Biden is behind it, Schumer is behind it, and Bernie's the one who wrote it, So everybody, all these people that supported Bernie Sanders, who are now being cynical and nihilistic and not supporting it, and are even calling Bernie a cuck. Can you imagine calling Bernie a cuck? They're the ones that are going to lose out if this thing doesn't pass. The only people that they're hurting by sitting on the sidelines are themselves. Yeah,
it's unfortunate. And I agree with you, Lauren. I think I've come to that weird situation, too, where I think you can do both. I think there is a position of saying, yeah, it should be Medicare for all. Everybody needs to be covered. By the same token, I do recognize that coverage of X is better than where we were. And it doesn't seem like that level of, nuance is there anymore. And maybe, it's just gone on for so long that it's just gotten to the point where the nihilists have gained traction. But yeah, I think it's both. I mean, Shane has a point, right? I mean, because that's I don't think I've deviated or changed the position. I think I've moderated a bit, though, because when you see something that has significant effect and you have other people who say, oh, that's nothing, it's like, okay, now you're being dishonest. And now I need to know why. It's that. It's kind of a trail of breadcrumbs. Lauren, you brought up people being attacked. You made this point. You asked me if I wanted to cover, go into some of the journalists that were being attacked by anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers, social distancers, and all these other people who are basically out there attacking journalists. You could go into that for me, because I saw this online. I saw it on, I think it was on Twitter the other day, where somebody was actually assaulted. And you made the point that Antifa is the only group out there, but meaning in defense or pushing back. But for the most part, you have left-wingers who are doing it and right-wingers who are doing it.
Doing the attacking?
Yes.
Matt Taibbi talks about some Antifa attack in Portland, but what he doesn't point out is that Ford Fisher's associate was previously punched by a Proud Boy. So I thought it was very interesting that Matt Taibbi is going against Antifa, which is the only organization, as you mentioned, that is out there trying to protest fascists. I remember I covered in Orange County in 2017, there was to be a right-wing rally saying immigrants are stealing our jobs. And 2,500 people turned up to counter-protest that. There were only 50 actual protesters, so they were clearly outnumbered. And there were some Antifa people, there were DSA, there were Bernie people, there were even just local residents of Laguna Beach, where the rally was, to speak out on, behalf of immigrants and against this, growing fascism that everybody was worried Trump was bringing. Because remember, this was in the spring of 2017. And over the years, when I was in Beverly Hills, Trump would have fundraisers there periodically, and I would always go cover them. And the only people protesting him were Refuse Fascism, which was a coalition started by the Revolutionary Communist Party, Bob Avakian's group. I used to think of them as sort of cultists because they would always be out there with their newspapers, handing them out and trying to convert people. And I remember in Occupy, they would always have people at our Occupy marches, doing the same thing. And they got a reputation, at least in Los Angeles, where nobody wanted to work with them because that's what they were doing. They were proselytizing and co-opting. But really, during the Trump years, they were the only leftists out there protesting him. And they were just really worried that fascism was coming to the United States. Now, I was always going back and forth as to whether Donald Trump was a real fascist or whether he was just a demagogue and who admired authoritarians.
This is an older conversation. We've only got so much time, but I think that a lot of those claims, despite January 6th, were ultimately overblown because he was so ineffective. Whatever you think his ambitions were, he wasn't able to get the thing done, which is why ultimately the machine, the establishment behind the scenes, is so much more powerful than any one contender, even as it grows weaker over time, arguably. But Antifa, guilty. To be clear, I don't like the Proud Boys, but there was this gladiatorial combat thing going on for years, specifically last summer. People were getting hurt on a daily basis. People were getting killed quite frequently. And I would argue that both sides were responsible for a lot of that. I don't want to make too much out of it, but I saw a clip recently with a woman, black woman, whose kids were hit with pepper spray, and she's standing up to Antifa because they did it. It wasn't the Proud Boys. It was her standing in front of this crowd, and it wouldn't make for good radio exactly, but it would get the emotion across. She's pissed at these people because it's them, and they say that they represent her, which is part of it that's disgusting to me. But Lauren, what are your thoughts?
Back to the anti-mask and anti-vax protests, because my friend Tina Desiree Berg, and she was on Democracy Now! The other day.
Lauren, we're going to have to stop, Lauren. I'm sorry. We're going to have to end it. But look, the voice that you guys were listening to, Lauren Steiner, she's a grassroots activist and organizer who fights privatization of public institutions and public good. I want to thank Shane, co-host, engineers, producer. Happy birthday, Andre. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.